respect to other Aboriginals present. I welcome Minister Don Harwin and accompanying officials to this hearing. Today, the committee will examine the proposed expenditure for portfolios of Special Minister of State, Public Service and Employee Relations, Aboriginal Affairs and the Arts. Before we commence, I would like to make some brief comments about the procedure for today's hearing. Today's proceedings are being broadcast live from Parliament's website, and a transcript will be placed on the committee's website once it becomes available. In accordance with broadcasting guidelines, media representatives are reminded that they must take responsibility for what they publish about the committee's proceedings. All witnesses in budget estimates have a right to procedural fairness according to the Procedural Fairness Resolution adopted by the House in 2018. There may be some questions that a witness could only answer if they had more time or with certain documents to hand. In these circumstances, witnesses are advised that they can take a question on notice and provide an answer within 21 days. If witnesses wish to hand up documents, they should do so through the committee staff. Minister, I remind you and the officers accompanying you that you are free to pass notes and refer directly to your advisors, if you have any, seated behind you, which they are over there. In terms of the audibility of the hearing today, we have witnesses in person and via teleconference. Video conference. Can I ask committee members to clearly identify who questions are directed to, and could I ask everyone appearing remotely to please state their name when they begin speaking? Could everyone please mute their microphones when they're not speaking? And finally, could everyone please turn their mobile phones to silent for the duration of the hearing? All witnesses will be sworn prior to giving evidence. Minister Harwin, I remind you that you do not need to be sworn, as you have already sworn an oath to your office as a Member of Parliament. For all other witnesses, I ask that you each, in turn, state your full name, position, title and agency, swear either an oath or an affirmation. The words of both the oath and the affirmation are on cards on the table in front of you. And can we please begin with the first witness to my left? And I think that's you, Ms Foy. This is your first budget estimates this term, or supplementary?
Yes, it is, Mr. Borzak. Thank you. I, Catherine Foy, Deputy Secretary, Department of Premier and Cabinet. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you.
Borzak.
Mr Coots-Trotter.
Thank you, Chair. Michael Coots-Trotter, Secretary of the New South Wales Department of Premier and Cabinet. I swear that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth, so help me God.
Thank you. How are we doing the video conferencing people? Are they going to go by rotation? I can hardly see them over there. Does someone want to start? Identify yourself, please, and maybe start with first on the left.
Yeah, you could probably just go through the list.
Go through the list? Okay. Why not? What have we got here?
Ms Havila.
Ms Havila. She's down in the far corner, is she? Oh, yeah. I see a little blob down there. Microphone on?
Right, there's no sound.
Can't hear a thing.
Testing. Can you hear us now? Can you hear us?
Now we can.
Now we
yes.
can.
Okay. I'll start again if that's okay. Lisa Havila, I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms Heron. Ms Heron. No, gone.
There?
Louise
I
Heron.
can't actually see her. Is she there?
No show. Oh. She's not there.
No, she's not in that group.
Nicole Courtman.
Good morning. Nicole Courtman. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Dr Brand.
Hi, good morning. Michael Brand, Director of the Art Gallery of New South Wales.
and I solemnly, sincerely, and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Ms Lowe?
Good morning, Chair. Katharina Lowe, New South Wales Public Service Commissioner. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Mr Houston?
Good morning, Chair. Charlie Houston, Executive Director of Employee Relations, Department of Premier and Cabinet. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Mr Keeley?
Good morning, Chair. My name is Christopher James Price Keeley. I'm the Executive Director of Create New South Wales, which is part of the Department of Premier and Cabinet. And I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Ms Gordon?
Morning, Lillian Gordon, Head of Aboriginal Affairs. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. And Ms Pittman?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Annette Pittman, Head of Create Infrastructure. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
All right. I see Ms Heron has joined us. Ms Heron, would you like to give us your oath, please?
Yes, my name is Louise Heron. I'm the CEO of the Sydney Opera House. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you. Have we missed anybody? Anybody not given the oath? Going, gone. Okay. All done. Thank you. All right, today's hearing will be conducted from 9:30am till 12:45 with the Minister and departmental witnesses with questions from the opposition and crossbench. If required, an additional 15 minutes is allocated at the end of the session for government questions. As there's no provision for any witness to make an opening statement before the committee commences questioning, we'll begin with questions from the opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll start my very first question with the Arts Minister, Mr. Harwin. Thank you, Mr. Harwin. I want to take you back to August the 24th, 2018. And that involves the funding, your announcement, and if it's necessary, I can table it. It's a press release under your letterhead, under your name, as Arts Minister announcing an additional $20 million commitment to the construction of a purpose-built recital hall to ensure that Wagga Wagga becomes the Riverina's premier entertainment destination. Do you recall this press release, Minister?
I most certainly do.
Did you, were you involved in the preparation of this press release?
Well, I probably would have seen it before I released it, but no, I wasn't involved in actually writing it.
Okay, but you would have seen the press release before it was issued, right? Mr. Kootstrader, what is the status of the Riverina Conservatorium of Music at the moment?
I'm sorry, Mr. Secord, I'm woefully ill-prepared for these estimates, so I'll need to take that on notice. I don't know, but I'll take it on notice and respond to the committee.
Mr. Harwin, what happened prior to August the 24th, 2018, this announcement? You made it as Arts Minister. What was your involvement in this announcement?
Well, there's not a lot I can add to what I said in the House, I think about 2 weeks ago, but I'm happy to go through that.
Yeah,
I mean, in summary, virtually no involvement whatsoever. I was just asked to make the announcement. But I, as you know, once...
Can I stop you there? I'd like to ask a question based on that. Is it customary for you to make announcements without knowing what the announcements are and the background to them?
I have answered this question on several occasions, but I'm happy to go through it again. It's very simple. The Riverina Conservatorium of Music, Stage 1 is in a New South Wales government-owned property, which is undergoing a refurbishment to provide a new home. Now, you'd be aware of that, and those works for Stage 1 once finished, all involved in a building which previously was, from recollection, an RMS building being leased to the Riverina Conservatorium of Music. DPI holds the property, and Property and Development New South Wales is actually delivering the project. The funding of $10 million for Stage 1 was funded in the 2019-2020 New South Wales budget under the Property New South Wales Building Refurbishment Program. Create New South Wales received reports from DPI during the design scope stage, but was not involved in the delivery of Stage 1 at all. Then there's, and as I'm sure you know, Stage 1 is for the transformation of that building into a purpose-built tuition and rehearsal space, along with admin and meeting facilities, which is really very much needed for the Riverina Conservatorium and enabling it to deliver its services to the people of the Riverina. And it's expected that Stage 1 will be finished sometime during 2022. Stage 2, I really had no involvement in. This process was led by, the whole process was led by the Department of Regional New South Wales, and therefore is not, strictly speaking, of any relevance to me. But I know you're asking me a question about the press release, so I'm happy to answer that. Stage 2, which was a public commitment for the construction of a $20 million purpose-built recital hall and ancillary facilities for the Riverina Conservatorium of Music, was subject to full project scope and costings and completion of a business case. So all of those things had to be done before any money would be spent on it. And in terms of those processes, as I've reiterated, Create New South Wales had no involvement in any of them. They were all being led by Regional New South Wales. And I would remind you that regional conservatoriums or conservatoria are independent, not-for-profit organisations that receive operating funding through the Department of Education. So even to that extent, there's been no involvement by me. Now, I'm aware, well, you would be aware, I should say, that some regional conservatoria did apply for and were eligible to apply for money out of the Regional Cultural Fund.
In fact, I remember in Parliament you announcing a couple
Riverina, indeed. Riverina Conservatorium did not do that. It was never, as I recall, advanced through the Regional Cultural Fund. Now, I confess that a lot of what the process in terms of it being taken to Expenditure Review Committee and Regional New South Wales's work, I'm just not briefed on because I wasn't involved. And frankly, I only made that announcement because I think, as is a matter of public record and has been canvassed in the last few days at the ICAC, that decision was in terms of Stage 2 was made after the former member for Wagga Wagga left Parliament and there was a by-election. On that particular day, I was visiting Wagga Wagga to make an announcement about library funding. Why was I doing it in Wagga? Well, in part because there was a by-election, let's be frank, but mostly because the relevant head of the association was from Wagga. Yep. And that's why I was making it in Wagga. And I was asked by the Premier's office to make this announcement at the same time. Beyond that, honestly, Walt, I have really no further information I can help you with.
Mr. Harwin, did Daryl Maguire or Julia Ham ever make representations to you involving the Conservatorium of Music in Wagga?
Julia Ham didn't. I recall that sometime prior to that, on a previous visit to Wagga, and I couldn't really remember which one it was, that Daryl showed me the stage one building.
Oh, he took you there. Did he take you there?
Well, we were travelling from one place to somewhere else. We went to a number of things.
So these are these famous trips where you get into the car with him and he would take various ministers to sites of the electorate. Is that right?
Well, I don't know whether they're famous or not.
They are famous.
They've become famous.
Or infamous might be a more correct phrase.
But the reality is that on that particular day, I visited with him the Green Gunyahs Museum in Lockhart, a great facility. I visited also the Batlow Literary Institute, a great facility.
I remember that. We asked questions about that.
Both funded through the Regional Cultural Fund. And as you could probably understand, Batlow, Wagga Wagga is, effectively halfway between Batlow and Lockhart. And yes, we did go through Wagga Wagga and did a number of other things that day, but I don't remember them. And at the same time, he took me past stage one. So he showed me the stage one building and he said that the Conservatoria would like a recital hall next to it. I remember that. But that's literally the only involvement that I had.
Minister, would you have issued this press release, this statement, if you'd known about the relationship between Mr. Maguire and Ms. Berejiklian?
Well, look, that's a totally hypothetical question.
No, it's not.
And I'm just not going to get into it.
Well, Minister, I'd like to ask the question again. You may not want to answer the question. That's your prerogative. But would you have issued this press release if you had known about the relationship between Mr. Maguire and the Premier? It's a very easy question.
The truth, Walt,
if you asked me the question, I would say no.
You've asked the question, let him answer it.
The truth, Walt, is that I didn't know of the relationship, so it is purely hypothetical.
Ms. Foy, do you have any knowledge? The Minister mentioned Create New South Wales, and his answer had been consulted or informed a process. Now, what is your knowledge of the Riverina Conservatorium of Music, and what were those consultations that involved your area of responsibility?
Thanks, Mr. Secord. My knowledge is, as the Minister has reported, as you know, I commenced in the role in 2019, so I don't have any direct understanding of what happened prior to that time, and the role of creators as the Minister has described.
You have no knowledge, and you've done no. Have you done any follow-up involving the Conservatorium of Music?
No, I have not.
Minister Harwin, now there's been concerns expressed in the community down there by the local member, Dr. Joe McGurr, concerned that the government will not complete the project.
Sorry, the stage two?
Yes, of the Conservatorium of Music.
Well, look, I haven't been further briefed beyond the information that I've given you. I've stated quite clearly it's a matter for regional New South Wales, and I think, honestly, the best way you could pursue it is to really take it up in regional New South Wales estimates, Walt, because it's not something that my portfolio has any accountability for.
Minister, I want to take you to support for arts organizations during the COVID period.
Certainly.
Can you update me on what is the status of the, I think you made an announcement earlier in the year, or recently actually, 75 million. Can you update me on that, please?
Yes, I'd be delighted to. Obviously, you'd be probably aware now that the nature of our, well, the extent, I should say, of our support for the sector during COVID-19, right from the beginning in 2020 through to now, approaches about $250 million in total. and I am very happy to answer any question about any particular part of it. I note you've raised one part of it, which is the most recent.
Actually, Minister, I'll take you up on what you just offered, because I'm mindful of my time's coming up shortly. So let's hone in on the $75 million fund. $75 million fund that you announced most recently. And can you tell me, of that $75 million fund, how much has been dispersed?
Yes, I'll give you the figure right up front. It's $40.8 million as at 26th of October 2021. So the purpose of the package was to ensure that the performing arts remains financially viable. The package was designed to provide urgent financial support to performing arts venues, producers and promoters impacted by the cancellation or postponement of performances resulting from the New South Wales COVID-19 public health orders from 26 June 2021 to 18 September 2021. For the period after 18 September 2021, there is an additional package that is available as well for
now, how much
for new losses.
Now, of the June 26th...
And the package, you'll want to know, the package has supported 111 eligible applications, which represent well over 1,100 venues, organisations, producers and artists.
Now, of that, how many? What proportion of that went to rural and regional New South Wales?
I think I'll take that on notice at this stage, but I'll flag that I'll get you, that I might be able to give you that total figure at the end of the estimates hearing, but I don't have it in that form in front of me. I've got a list of all of them, but not broken up by.
So this this fund for performing arts venues would go from small independent theatre operations to large.
Most certainly, Walt.
Commercial operations.
I will see what I can find here that might give you a taste for it, but is not necessarily in that form. So you'd be aware that, for example, it also covers live music.
Yep. But I'm interested in the performing arts.
But I just wanted to make clear. So, for example, the Cambridge Hotel in Newcastle, which is a well-known live music venue, has received $206,272. So I would call that more mid-range. Then there's, for example, the Cowra Civic Centre that's received now $9,255 for the Manning Entertainment Centre on the Mid-North, that's operated by Mid-North Coast Council at Taree, $5,625. So that gives you a taste. The Illawarra On Point organisation, which is an orchestra that's Wollongong based, has had $58,776, and Theatre Oz, Port Macquarie, $5,126, and even the good old Woy Woy Little Theatre Inc., which I haven't had the chance to visit yet, but I have been wanting to get to since it's not far from home, is $7,949. So obviously that's at the smaller end, but then the way the formula is calculated is that it's a reflection of the number of performances, right? The number of seats that, the number of performances, the number of seats, and that in itself also reflects, due to the economies of performing, the number of people that are working in the on the shows. Right, so obviously there is more substantial figures for other productions.
I understand that. So $7,949 for did you say Woi Woi?
Woi Woi Little Theatre Inc.
Yep, Little Theatre, right. So now what is the...
So that's just a selection.
No, I understand that. Now what's the maximum amount that a performing...
So I've taken a decision that in terms of the $75 million and the $50 million, no one single production may get more than 10% of the total fund.
10%, so what is that?
Which is $12.5 million.
12.5 million, that's right. So it's 12.5 million is the maximum that a theatrical organization could receive under your fund.
Which basically reflects the fact that obviously there are some productions that employ a lot of people.
No, I understand that.
And with the public health orders as they, I mean, you would be aware of the economics of some of the big commercial theatre productions.
Yep.
It is the case that for a lot of them, unless they are selling at 85% or more, they are not breaking even. Now, the public health orders limits theatre capacities to 75%. So if the state government didn't step in, literally you'd have the big shows not being able to reopen at all.
Minister, that's where I want to go to. So it's been put to me, and is this correct, that you provided Hamilton with the absolute maximum, which was $12.5 million? It's a yes or no question.
As at the 26th of October, it's not the case that they've had the maximum.
Okay,
but they have had a substantial amount, and the fact is that they would not have been able to reopen at all if they hadn't received the amount that they're eligible to receive under the guidelines. They would just have simply packed up shop and gone to Melbourne. And I think that would have been a tragedy for Sydney, where New South Wales has done so well responding to COVID.
Okay, but Minister,
to be able to reward the people of New South Wales with those shows.
But Minister, you named about 7 different companies in New South Wales. You named expressly dollar for dollar what you provided to them.
Yes.
How much did you provide?
I'm very happy to tell you. So far, as at the 26th of October, Hamilton Production Australia Proprietary Limited has had 10 million 64,780.
That's as of October 26th.
26, yes.
Why do you give that date as the date?
Because I think that's the date that we printed out the list.
I'm just asking the
Printed out the list to be ready in our estimates folder.
So
3 days ago.
It's as simple as that, Walt.
No, I'm just asking the question.
I can promise you there's nothing to see here. That's just
nothing to see here. Move along. So I wanted
to laugh.
I just heard the buzzer, but I just wanted to so 10 million 10 million
1,006,4,780. Does that make it a little easier for you?
Yes, it is. I wanted you to say that. Thank you, Minister.
Minister,
yes, Robert.
What actually are the criteria for making grants to various arts programs, firstly in the bush and then secondly here in Sydney?
You'll have to specify exactly which program, Robert. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be difficult, but lots of the programs have different guidelines. So you really will have to specify which.
Well, why don't you start at the top of the list and work your way down?
Can I also ask, are you asking about COVID-19 support packages, or are you asking about routine arts funding grants?
In the first instance, I'm talking about COVID.
Yep.
And the second instance, I'm talking about the routine grants programs. But more specifically, what I'm interested in is the criteria within there. In other words, what gives one arts program a preference over another?
Well, I don't know that. Could you just expand on what you're trying to ask in terms of that last point?
Well, I think the, for example, you answered the question in relation to Hamilton.
Yeah.
And you said, oh, I didn't want to lose that to Melbourne. So
Melbourne was in
Well, I don't think that's quite right. I put it more this way, which is I would think, but for the help of some money, to have that not reopen at all when it really could would have been a great shame. And it's not just Hamilton. I wouldn't want you to think it's just Hamilton. It's a wide variety of art forms and a wide variety of performances in a wide variety of locations. But in any case, I'm very happy to go through each of the big programs and outline what they're for. In terms of the specific guidelines, I won't. All of them are on the Create New South Wales website, but I'll pretty much summarise them so you get a feel for each of them. The stage one in 2020, which was rescue funding, was the first part of the $50 million Arts Rescue and Restart program we had last year. It was focused on the critical need to support arts companies who are in financial distress and imminent risk of insolvency due to the impact of COVID-19. The goal was to ensure the companies remained solvent during the lockdown period and that the state retained the critical arts organisations that support the ecology. The eligibility criteria were that they were New South Wales based, that they were not-for-profit, that they were arts and cultural organisations, that they were in financial distress, and that the financial distress was because of COVID-19. A key assumption was that the rescue funding, which was the first part of the first stage of Rescue and Restart, was that the funding would be needed for the period to September 2020, with restart forecast following that date. This was in line with when the Australian government placed the deadline on for JobKeeper. So the initial assessments were done by DPC through Create New South Wales, with detailed financial assessment conducted by Treasury with the assistance of Create New South Wales and PwC when that was necessary. Once the applications were assessed, recommendations were made to the Deputy Secretary, who's sitting next to me, for endorsement, and then were signed off by me. 27 companies received $18.1 million, with a wide spread of major, small to medium and community-based organisations receiving support. And I'm very proud to say that, to the best that I am aware or my department is aware, not one company suffered an insolvency event during that stage. So that was very successful. Stage two focused on relaunching the sector once health orders allowed, with funding available to enable organisations to restart operations when the health guidelines permitted. The priorities we gave with stage two were to create jobs in the sector, to develop new work, and to support the regions. So there was $30 million that were provided in that particular stage. It was effectively stimulus to 182 Create New South Wales multi-year and annually funded organisations. So what happened was that funding amounts under this part of the package were based on average turnover from 2018 to 2019 and capped to $750,000 per company to ensure there was a very wide funding distribution. So there were 182 recipients of that. Now, the characteristic of both stage one and stage two was it was very formulaic, and they were not as such grant programs which were assessed. Stage 1, they were analysed literally as an accounting exercise. Stage 2, we just we cut it up based on size so that it was an equitable distribution across the sector with a cap so that no one organisation got too much. So I come to this year's programs, I should say, with the $75 million being the first stage this year. And I did go through that in some detail with the Honourable Walt Secord a little earlier. So I didn't. I won't go over all of that again, but I would add this. Eligible venues were determined through sector consultation, review and marketing materials of venues, and also an assessment of ticket sales through ticket agencies. Those venues falling outside the eligible venues list could apply for eligibility consideration through Create New South Wales. Applications opened from 23 July 2021, and to be eligible for funding, applicants had to be one of the identified eligible venues or a promoter or producer of a performance in an identified eligible venue. And then yet again with that fund, with that program, again it was according to a formula. It wasn't a matter of, you know, applying for a grant and then being assessed on merit or impact, as normally would be the case with Create New South Wales. It was a matter of looking at the eligible performances and the number of seats, and it was a calculation. Again, it was largely like stage 1 of restart and refresh. It was done according to a formula. So, the $50 million extension of that, the Performing Arts Relaunch Package, which was announced 2 weeks ago, is very similar. Guidelines have been developed to support the new $50 million relaunch package and the new $25 million festivals package. They've been signed off now, and they've been put on the Create New South Wales website as well. But the key elements of the relaunch package are that, as I've said earlier to Walt, limiting the total combined amount that can be paid under both packages to $12.5 million, requiring performances planned from 1 November 2021 to be staged for payments to be made. And we've also now included, we can include, if it's warranted, the state significant organisations to be funded as well, such as the Museum of Contemporary Arts and Carriage Works. Look, I might stop there just in case that there are some others. I could also talk about the other elements like culture uplates, the money that we're going to give for...
Minister, would you like to just maybe table that? Table that detail, and we'll move on.
Oh, well, look, I've just read it straight onto the record. There's nothing there that I haven't read onto the record, so it's not really needed.
Thank you.
Well, then you won't mind tabling it then.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister. If I can take you to your responsibilities as Minister for Aboriginal Affairs.
Yes, certainly.
Would I be right in saying that under Clause 113 of the National Agreement on closing the gap, New South Wales has a responsibility to review and identify current spending on Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander programs and to identify areas of new priorities and better reallocation of funding?
Absolutely. You are absolutely correct. And we have done it.
You've done it?
Yes, absolutely. But anyway, I'll let you ask another question.
How have you done it?
Treasury's done it.
Right. And when did you receive Treasury's Interim Indigenous Expenditure Report 2021?
Right. Well, just give me a minute to just check and see if I've got the actual date. I don't know if I do have that date. I might have to take that part on notice.
Would it have been in the second half of August, just recently?
That sounds right, but I think it would be better for me to just confirm that either later in the estimate session or on notice.
Thank you. And how did you respond to this observation, criticism in the Treasury report on page 3? Indigenous specific expenditure data has not historically been collected and reported centrally within New South Wales Government. Therefore, no stringent reporting frameworks have been established, and there is varying capability and limited resources within clusters and their agencies to report this information. How is it after 10 years in government and you have 2.5 years in the portfolio, you haven't even got a decent reporting system in place?
I was pretty appalled when I read that report, to be frank. Since we've put the closing the gap process in place, we have quarterly ministers meetings, which each of the ministers in each of the clusters that have responsibility for Aboriginal programs. And it was a key theme of the discussions that I had with each of the ministers at the quarterly meetings, which we held in, remind me, Renee, were they September or October? Yes, late September.
And when you say you're appalled with your own performance, your failure to put in place these reporting systems any time in the last 2.5 years of your ministry?
No, because with great respect, as you're well aware, Mr Latham, Aboriginal Affairs New South Wales is a central agency. It's not a service delivery agency. I expect Aboriginal Affairs New South Wales to be keeping an eye on what other portfolios are doing, and I expect them to be advising me when they think there's more that needs to be done. I can now advise you that I received the Indigenous Expenditure report on the 2nd of September 2021, just so that you know.
You didn't have a meeting on the 24th of August?
With whom?
With the Treasury officials who produced this interim expenditure report?
Well, look, I'll take that question on notice. I've been handed a note by my advisor, as you've seen, saying I received it on the 2nd of September 2021.
Well, if you don't know when...
That's the advice I've been given by my advisor, but I'm very happy to check it for you.
OK, thank you. And when you say you're appalled, what were you appalled by?
By the number of programs that didn't seem to have a requirement that they be regularly evaluated.
Yeah, the report speaks of over $1 billion of Indigenous-specific programs. So how is it after 10 years in government you've only got to the point of being appalled?
Well, with respect, Mr Latham, I became the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, let's see, after the last election. While I had my 3 months away from the portfolio last year, the Closing the Gap process was started. As you've identified, the Closing the Gap process had a requirement for an Indigenous expenditure review. That was started, and once it was completed, it was presented to me, and I have been acting on its interim findings since I received it.
Right, but Minister, you'll note that the report has 50 pages of random programs right across government where there's been no central reporting system to identify their effectiveness in Indigenous affairs. How can that happen? It's an appalling reflection on your predecessors as well, isn't it, Ministers Mitchell and Williams?
I don't wish to make those judgments about my predecessors. I'm here to explain what I've done since I received that information, and I'm acting on it.
On page 4 of the Treasury report, it says, with this process unearthing key findings and limitations in collecting data, the New South Wales Government has decided to publish the initial findings in an interim report. Where is that publication?
Well, I would suggest that you raise that with the Treasurer in Treasury estimates. It's up to Treasury to decide when and in what form it will be published.
You take responsibility for your reporting commitments under the National Agreement for Closing the Gap? you've got no idea when this vital information and critique of the government will be published?
This information has been shared with members of the Joint Council on closing the gap, including representatives of the Council of Aboriginal Peak Organisations, plus within the government, and we are acting on it. But when Treasury chooses to put it up on its website, it's its decision, and you should ask them.
Do you think that should be imminent, given the importance of the report and the importance of closing the gap?
I really don't have anything to add to what I've just said. I think that Treasury should be the ones that you pursue that with.
Yeah, if I can take you to page 7 of the report, it says there was also incompleteness and inconsistency in the non-financial data reported to Treasury, including the full alignment of expenditure data to discrete closing the gap targets, which basically means this government's got no idea of how it's spending money to close the gap, has it?
We've got a lot of work to do to make sure that we achieve the objectives of the Closing the Gap agreements, and we in Aboriginal Affairs New South Wales and all of the members of the Joint Council on Closing the Gap, including the Council of Aboriginal Peak Organisations, who already conduct a number of programs delivering services on behalf of the New South Wales Government, all of us, we are very well aware of those findings and what they mean, and acting on them to make sure that we effectively work towards closing the gap targets that are in the national agreement.
If I can take you to page 7, the top of page 7 on the report, and it states, in reviewing previous efforts to quantify Indigenous specific expenditure, it became clear that the current New South Wales Government financial reporting platform, Prime, does not have capability to attribute government spending to discrete Indigenous programs and services. Why haven't you even got the financial reporting platform in place to meet any possible obligations under closing the gap?
I know that you and I probably have the same view, which is that we welcome the fact that Treasury has done this work, and it will enable us to do a better job at more effectively closing the gap in the future.
When do you expect the financial reporting platform, an adequate one, to be in place?
Well, I'm not the Treasurer, but I am the Aboriginal Affairs Minister,
Correct.
and I am the co-chair of the Council, the Joint New South Wales Council, and I can assure you that it is one of the matters that I and my co-chairs from CAPO will be focusing on.
So you're treating that as a priority? And
Absolutely. Absolutely. Can I tell you that one of the major items of discussion at the most recent meeting of the Joint Council was the whole issue that you're pointing to now. It is a major priority, and can I say it's in particular a major priority for the Aboriginal community-controlled organisations, because what they hate more than anything else is government saying they're spending money helping them, but it's not being effective,
we'll come to that in the
and
report
it's being wasted.
Well. Yeah.
And I'm at one with them in wanting to stop that.
Yep, we'll come to that in the report. Can I take you to page 9, where it says, currently it's very difficult to attain data specific to Aboriginal people in New South Wales on a time series basis, including the discrete Aboriginal communities. While there are many point-in-time snapshot reports undertaken by government and academics, these cannot replicate the granular, regular data collection that the New South Wales Government usually relies upon for investment decisions. Isn't this just an absolute invitation to wasting money in the space of Indigenous affairs and not actually helping people in desperate need?
Well, data is better data is a key priority reform under the Closing the Gap agreement, and it's one that AA New South Wales, with the Department of Customer Services and other parts of government, are focused quite strongly on. If you would like to know a little bit more about what's being done, I'm very happy to invite my Deputy Secretary to outline it in some
we can take that on notice. We've got limited time.
Okay.
Would you agree that Indigenous people in New South Wales generally are the most disadvantaged in our entire state in terms of socio-economic outcomes?
I think there's extraordinary disadvantage amongst Aboriginal communities.
Why is it in terms of getting...
That's exactly why I think that acting upon some of the findings in the Indigenous Expenditure report is so important.
Why then would this report say you haven't got the data collection that you usually rely on for other investment decisions? Why have Indigenous people been treated as second or third rate, not even having the systems in place to judge whether the investment decisions for them are actually getting results?
Mr. Latham, I couldn't agree with you more. It's vital that we have that information, and as part of the emphasis I'm putting on making some of those priority reforms to ensure we meet those closing the gap targets, I am determined to improve our performance in this.
Thank you, Minister. Minister, I'll ask a couple of questions and I'll throw to my colleague Penny Sharp. Now, in the previous block, you mentioned that there were 111 successful applicants under the program. That Hamilton.
Sorry, which one? This is the 75 million, isn't it? Yeah.
That there were 111 successful applicants. That Hamilton received, as of October the 26th, $10,064,780.
Yep.
Was that the largest single disbursement under the program to a performing arts?
So far, yes, it was.
So far. How much did the production from Come From Away receive?
Now I'll just see what that's listed under.
Excellent production I saw this week.
Very good.
Yes. So in the case of Come From Away, the claim came from Capital Theatre Management Proprietary Limited. Yep. So, as I think I explained either in my answer to your question or Mr. Borzak's question, the applicant could either be the production company or the venue. Yep. So in the case of Come From Away, at Capital Theatre Management Proprietary Limited received... I'll just actually read out the figures, I think, rather than taking a conversational approach, because I think that will make it easier for you. 6838509. 6838509. So that's 6.8 million. Effectively 6.8 million.
6.8 million. And after that, what was the... Okay, so that would be the second largest... Was that the second largest under the fund?
Yes, it is.
Yes. Minister, to make it easier for you.
Oh, no. I thought I'd answered. I was waiting for your next question.
Okay.
Yeah.
So 111 were successful applicants.
Beg your pardon?
111 were successful applicants. How many organizations applied to the fund in total?
I think we'll take that question. Do we have that actually?
I'll just check.
We'll just check that for you, Walt. So you're either eligible or you're not eligible.
Okay.
And everyone that's eligible got funded.
Okay,
Put it this way, no one that was eligible wasn't funded.
Okay, Minister, to make it easier so my colleague can... if you want to take this on notice, I would like the full list of the 111 successful applicants, and I would like the total number of people or organizations that applied. And of the 111 successful applicants, I would like that the individual amount against that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. We've got that. I'm happy to give it to you.
Thank you, Minister.
Thanks, Minister.
But I just wanted to be clear. It's the 111 you want, isn't it? Not the...
I would like the full list of the 111 successful applicants and the amount, and I would also like the total number of applications, including unsuccessful applications.
There were no unsuccessful applications, was my point. If you are eligible, you were successful.
Okay, but against the amount. Thank you.
Yeah, no,
Ms.
thank
Sharp.
you. No,
Ms. Sharp
thanks
has
very much.
questions.
Minister, I want to talk to you about Aboriginal heritage impact permits.
Yep.
At estimates earlier this year, for the financial year 2021, you indicated that 85 had been approved. Can you tell me how many in total we ended up with in 2020, 2021?
Well, first of all, it's very important to note that Aboriginal heritage impact permit applications are rarely refused outright. The majority of Aboriginal impact permits are in fact approved with conditions that have been
Sorry, Minister, we'll get to that.
with the proponent and the Aboriginal community to avoid or mitigate impacts to the
Sure, that's not what I'm asking, though. I'm asking how many
values.
at the end of 2021 there were.
If I didn't give that information with respect, I wouldn't be giving you a proper perspective on that information.
Yeah.
So 211, as I understand, as I'm advised, were issued in the 2020-2021 year.
Minister, that's a massive increase over the averages since 2016. I mean, over 200 in a year is pretty significant. What's going on in terms of the approvals for these?
Well, let's be clear. As I just said, the majority of permits have been negotiated with the proponent and the Aboriginal community.
Yes.
And they're involved in that, and it's done to avoid or mitigate impacts.
Yes, no, I understand that, Minister, but obviously this is a very significant issue. You know, within our First Nations communities across the state, there is concern constantly about the loss of cultural heritage, and I'll get to some specific ones in a minute. But my point is that in the last 4 months of this year, 135 permits to harm, destroy, or in some ways change Aboriginal cultural sites was approved. Minister, are you able to tell us how many significant sites have been destroyed under the state significant development provisions or state significant infrastructure for 2021?
State significant development and state significant infrastructure projects are approved under the EP&A Act and are exempt from requiring Aboriginal...
That's exactly why I'm asking, Minister.
However, state significant development and state significant infrastructure are generally required to follow the same Aboriginal cultural heritage assessment and consultation processes as for Aboriginal heritage impact.
If they're generally required, Minister, why aren't they?
In the 2021-2022 financial year, since October the 20... Sorry, what was that?
Keep going.
Since 8th of October 2021, Heritage New South Wales has received 142 referrals from the Department of Planning, Industry and Environment for comments on Aboriginal cultural heritage matters.
Sorry, that was 8 October 2020? Is that what you said?
Yes, the 2021-2022 financial year. Since 8 October, actually...
Sorry, as at 8 October, is that what you're telling me?
No, I'm not sure that's what I'm telling you. That's actually...
It must be as at, we might clarify.
We'll just clarify that for you. I think it's as at 8 October 2020.
So in the first sort of three months, you've got another 142 referrals outside the AHIP process.
We've had 142 referrals from the Department of from DPI.
Since when?
In this financial year.
Yeah, so since 1 July this year.
I would assume
it's up to
8 October 2021.
Yeah, okay, so within 4 months, you've got 142 referrals for, impacts either directly or indirectly on Aboriginal cultural places or objects. That's separate to the AHIP process, just to be clear?
Yes.
Right. So can you also...
because the AHIP process is managed the by Heritage New South Wales.
Yep, we'll get to that, Minister. So that's
whereas
fine.
the other matters are dealt with by DPI.
But you're getting referrals for consultation. Is that what a referral?
Yes,
is that what that means?
When it's SSD or SSI.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah.
Can you then tell me how many AHIPs have been approved in that same timeframe from 1 July this year to whenever you've got the most recent update?
Sorry, I just was distracted then. Would you mind?
So you've given me the figure for 2021, which was 223 AHIPs. I want to know the figure from 1 July till whenever you've printed out your budget estimates folder.
Yes. In the 2021-2022 financial year, as at 8, I assume it's as at 8 October 2021. That it's not actually how it's written in my note, but that's what I assume it means, and that's what my Deputy Secretary thinks it means. Heritage New South Wales has received 50 Aboriginal Heritage Impact Permit applications and 1 care agreement application.
Right. So just to be clear, Minister...
46 of those have been issued.
And what's happened with the other 4? You're in discussion, is that right?
I'd have to see if the Deputy Secretary can help.
That's okay. I actually want to go...
I'll take it
That's
on notice.
fine. If you could take that on notice, that would be helpful. I mean, the point here is, so even through the AHIP process, we've got record numbers of applications. We had 211 last year. In the first 4 months this year, we've got 50 through that process, but, almost 3 times as many through the state significant, which is 142 referrals. How many of the state significant development issues have been rejected? Has there been any Aboriginal place or cultural object that has been saved through this process?
I think that's actually a question you should ask the Minister.
But Minister, you just opened up on this. Minister, you just said, well, actually through the law we are checking, we're taking a role in relation to this. You've said you've had 142 referrals, so why can't you tell me how many of them have been approved?
Well, I'll take that question on notice for you.
And can you, all right, and while you're taking it on notice, so what is the role of your department if basically state significant development and state significant infrastructure essentially suspends the requirements that would operate through AHIPs? But you're telling us that you have some role, but you can't tell me what that role is. I mean, are you concerned that you've got a tripling through this planning pathway? You've got a tripling of destruction of Aboriginal cultural sites and heritage.
Under the EP&A Act, projects can be classified as state significant developments or infrastructure, often referred to as major projects.
Yep.
If they are important to the state for economic, environmental or social reasons. Major projects are assessed under Division 4.7 of
Look,
the
Minister, I actually understand that. My questions clearly understand that. My question is to you as the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs. Are you concerned that through this planning pathway there are 3 times more applications to destroy Aboriginal cultural heritage that you don't necessarily get a say into? Are you concerned about that?
Well, there is ongoing consultation with the Heritage Council and Heritage New South Wales, which provide comments to DPI at multiple stages of the major project approval pathway. This typically includes the provision of advice on the development of SEARs, i.e. the Secretary's environmental approval requirements, the proponent's environmental impact assessment and the project's final
Minister, I understand all of that, and you're going to tell me of those 142. I'd also like the figures from last year, so for 2021. Are you able to tell me that through that pathway?
Well, I'm not sure if we have that figure. Do we have that?
No, if you can take it on notice, that would be great. And again, I'd like the information of how many of those have subsequently been approved. Minister, when are we going to see the next draft of the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Bill?
Right. Well, this has been a matter that we've been very much focused on throughout our this parliamentary term, and I've carefully reviewed the draft 2018 Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Bill, and I believe it can be improved. I continue to engage directly with key Aboriginal stakeholders, Newswalk and New South Wales NTS Corp. These groups broadly represent the extensive New South Wales Aboriginal Land Rights Network and native title
Minister,
holders.
you can just read these answers, but where is the next draft of the bill? When are we going to see it? This has been going for over a decade.
Order.
I'm sorry, the member did ask a question about what was happening in the broad context of this bill.
No, I actually asked when we're going to see the bill.
I'm making a point of order. The Minister was giving a very clear, very relevant answer to that. I do think it's not inappropriate that the Minister be allowed to finish his answer.
Well, if it's going to go for half an hour, I don't think it's appropriate.
Order.
Well, over the past year, I've met with representatives on many occasions, and my agency have also been speaking with representatives regularly, in addition to correspondence. On 1 September 2020, I met with chairs of Newswalk, the Aboriginal Cultural Heritage Advisory Committee and NTS Corp to discuss the progress of the reforms. On 10 December 2020, I met again with these representatives from each of the groups at a workshop on the reforms. Earlier this year, AA engaged
Minister, I'm very pleased that you've been having meetings, but this process, so we had a draft bill that was pulled by your government before the last election in 2018. We're now 3 years in, and my question is very basic. When are we going to see the next draft of this bill? I'm pleased that you've been talking to people, but
I'm happy to let you know that it is at an advanced stage. Obviously, before I'm able to release the bill, it is required to go through cabinet processes. It has yet to go through those cabinet processes. But, well, while Cabinet is extremely busy at the moment with quite full agendas, it's not far off, and it is my hope that I will have a bill which can be put out for consultation not long after Christmas.
So we won't see it in part. Well, okay, not before Christmas. Right. Thank you for that. No, that's fine. Minister, I wanted to ask you, given the pressure in relation to Aboriginal cultural heritage, you've got record numbers of referrals for destruction of Aboriginal cultural heritage through AHIP and through state significant development. Is it the case that you are reducing staff in Heritage New South Wales?
Well, staffing is a matter for well, first of all, I just want to make it clear that I have staff in AA New South Wales and Heritage New South Wales who are working on this issue. So it's not just Heritage New South Wales that's relevant to this particular matter. But staffing matters are handled by the Secretary and the Deputy Secretary, and I will invite one of those, whoever prefers to.
I might invite my colleague Ms Foy
to respond to you.
Happy to. Thanks, Ms Sharp. With respect to the cultural heritage reforms, we have a joined-up approach and resources that are allocated from a number of agencies. So it's a DPC-sponsored project with staff from Aboriginal Affairs, staff from DPI and staff from Heritage New South Wales involved in it. So I'm very pleased with the level of collaboration and cooperation from those agencies to resource the project. And we also work with...
That's terrific. I just want to know how many staff you're cutting out of Heritage New South Wales.
We have a restructure on foot. Look, the first point is we always have to operate efficiently. We've been through, for example, the review of the Heritage Act, and there's been made some very salient points around the operation of heritage. One of those things is to drive an improvement in customer service.
That's terrific, Ms Foy. How many staff are being made redundant, restructured out, however you want to describe it, out of Heritage New South Wales?
I'm sorry to interrupt, but as far as I can see, the Deputy Secretary has given extremely important context into this important issue, and it's obviously up to her to answer the question as she does and as she wishes, and I think she is answering it in a very relevant fashion.
Thank you. I know the clock's ticking. That's okay. If you want to take it on notice, that's fine.
I'm happy to come back to you by the end of it, but there's a small small number that will change. We went through a voluntary redundancy process with the Department of Premier and Cabinet earlier in the year. Any numbers of people would be those that have put their hand up for a voluntary redundancy, not to suggest that if you did put your hand up you would get one. There are a small number of changes. I'll get you a precise number.
If you could give me, so what last year's EFT and
I'll
what
take
next
that on
year's
notice and hand
EFT
you
will
those
be.
numbers. But I do wish to make the point that for heritage, we have heard very clearly from our stakeholders that having a better customer-centred approach to that work is critically important. The second point I would make is the benefit of having both heritage and Aboriginal affairs in the Department of Premier and Cabinet is that we can resource activities by joining together our staff and staff resources. So I wouldn't want to suggest that those matters exclusive to heritage, like AHIPs or the advisory role we play with government agencies, is exclusively the domain of those particular individuals.
Well, thank you. Minister, it's after a decade, we still haven't commenced Section 21AA of the Fisheries Management Act 1994. Why is that?
I'll take that question on notice.
Minister, you're aware, you know what I'm talking about when I quote that, which is about cultural fishing practices for First Nations people.
Yes, I do, but I will take that question on notice.
Have you met with the Minister responsible for fisheries to try and progress this issue?
No.
Why not?
As I said, I'm taking the question on notice.
Thank you.
Ms Fairman?
Oh, actually, I may be able to help. If you want, I'll come back later to the issue, but I can. Well, maybe we'll leave. We
might just leave
later and
for the moment.
Start
Minister.
with Kate. Yep.
Ms Fairman.
Thank you, Chair. Morning, Minister. I heard you answering the questions before in relation to the support packages for arts organisations that your government has been putting out, which is great. I just wanted to move to grants for individual artists and ask what has been done for individual artists that aren't part of arts organisations.
Asked me about coming on, she did.
So individual artists without, they're not venues.
Part of organisations.
No, they're just individual artists.
Not part of organisations. Well, we've had measures in both stages of rescue and both last year and this year that are particularly last year, I should say, that were targeting individuals. Now, let me just try and find details of that.
Okay, all right. Well, it doesn't matter. We'll come to
that. In particular, there was $300,000 that was put aside for COVID development grants that went to independent artists. There was also $600,000 in small project grants, which were quick response grants, i.e. Dealt with by Create New South Wales on a very fast turnaround.
So the first one was 500,000 and the second one you just said 600?
First one was 300. Second one was 600,000. Yeah. And the second, and I might also say this year, in particular, we're currently at a very advanced stage in terms of our arts and culture funding program, round one for 2022. And we have taken a deliberate decision to increase the number, beyond what we would normally do, the number of projects that are being allocated to individuals so that we can meet that need as well. Now, the exact amount that will go into that, I can't tell you today because Create is literally working on that as we speak, and we're not far off being able to announce that. We'll probably have that figure for you announce the successful applicants and the amount probably within 2 weeks, maybe 3 at the outside.
Thank you. So I understand the first, the $300,000, with that one, artists could apply to receive grants of up to $5,000. Is that correct?
Yes, I think that. Sorry? It was $10,000.
Okay, I've got the Sydney Morning Herald article here that says artists can apply to receive grants of up to 5, but companies to 10,000. I shouldn't be looking at that.
Maybe Matthew can answer for you. Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Okay, and so the second lot of 600,000, was that similar in terms of the maximum that artists could apply for, and could the same individual go to both pools? And the point I'm getting at here is overall...
Unfortunately, because of COVID, whereas once I could literally turn around and have a conversation with my advisor,
I can have a conversation with him too in this situation.
So I think possibly... I don't have that granularity in the note in front of me, so what I'm going to suggest is we put, I think, 15 minutes aside at the end to add.
Well, for government questions, Minister.
For government questions, but if there are no government questions, then I'll just get a note written so that we can answer for you.
Thank you. The point of the question was just to work out the level of support, particularly obviously because when JobKeeper was no longer available, the number of creative workers and artists who weren't able to access funding, and what was the overall amount that they could access from this government, I suppose.
Let's be clear, individuals, depending upon, individual projects in the performing arts could still be funded out of this year's performing arts package. So I mentioned those two schemes, but it has been possible for individuals to be funded out of the $125 million that's allocated. So they're eligible depending upon what their performance is, if they're in the performing arts, to be funded out of that as well.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
And really, honestly, it's in particular the performing arts that's worst hit by COVID.
Has Create New South Wales put on more staff since the outbreak to cope with what I would only imagine is a huge demand on your services?
Well, I just wanted to say that COVID certainly has belted the arts sector, and the Create New South Wales staff have been magnificent in responding to the sector's needs. And I did want to pay tribute to the director, Chris Keeley, to Sue Proctor, who deals with most of the financial side of it, and also to the team led by Dr. Rebecca Dean, who have been handling the public health orders. They have been truly magnificent. But I would like to, given that it's a staffing matter, invite the Deputy Secretary to respond.
Thank you, Minister. Thanks, Ms Fairman. A couple of comments there. So we have that core team. Create, for Heritage, is part of the Department of Premier and Cabinet, so we do make sure that the resources available in government are there to support these activities. So for the COVID support package, we have fantastic support from Treasury and also from the Department of Premier and Cabinet finance team to support the core work that Create's doing. We've done a couple of things. We've brought on some additional resources into particularly the team doing the financial assessment, and we've where we have any contractors in place, we've ensured that those contracts are extended so that we can cope with the demands of supporting the arts sector through COVID.
When you're saying bringing additional resources in, you mean people? How many additional people have you had to employ, for example, to process grants and to receive those phone calls, which we've also heard, particularly at the start of the outbreak, it was incredibly difficult to sometimes for them to speak to the right person?
Correct. There are probably a couple of things. I'll come back to you with the number. It's probably it's a small number, but also we have to work with the budgets that we have, obviously. So COVID and the response to COVID became the top priority for for the organisation. So where it was appropriate, people were reallocated to support that particular work, and certainly the people that the Minister has pointed out, everyone was absolutely fantastic in supporting the sector. I know that in previous estimates and inquiries we got direct feedback that we could do better in terms of providing, you know, direct and immediate communication, so we lifted on that. We continue to hold a number of forums and sessions, but again, it's reallocating and making sure that the executives in the agency and their staff are aware that this is a particular priority.
Okay. Yes, all right. Sorry, I had a mental blank as to where I was going with my next question, but it's just come back to me.
I know how you feel.
Yes,
I know
Friday.
how you feel.
There was a review into Hunter Arts. Let's see if I can find it. This is basically about mental health in the sector and the impacts of COVID on mental health in the sector. Minister, have you liaised with the mental health minister?
Just correct something from earlier, and then I'll get you to.
Yeah, sure. That might give me time to find this.
In fact, the COVID development grants was 500,000, not 300,000.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. Now, apologies, Kate. Would you mind re-asking the question?
In terms of the massive impact, of course, COVID has had on a lot of people's mental health. The arts community, in particular, research has shown has lots of people have suffered mental health impacts. Minister, have you met with your colleague, the Honourable Bronnie Taylor, to discuss support packages that are particularly targeted to the arts sector, or is there anything that the government's doing in this regard?
I haven't had a specific meeting with Bronnie about it, but I will take on notice and get back to you an answer on what we've been doing.
Okay. Just on the, we can turn to the, I'll come back to it.
Mr. Chair, with your permission, at the moment I'm suffering badly from hay fever, so I'm drinking a lot of water, and I'll ask for a short break.
I do have some Zyrtec. Need some, Minister.
Well,
I'll try to be as quick as
Sorry, Minister, just one moment. Is it worth then just bringing the official break forward to now?
That's what I was going to say. Let's recommence at 11:05.
Again, by the way.
No.
We had one scheduled for 11, so we'll recommence at 11:05.
Yep.
Okay,
15 minutes.
thank you very much.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. Excellent.
And so, but you guys, that means that
team has gone missing, but that's okay. We'll get ready to go? On air. Okay, thanks. Mr. Latham?
Oh, yeah, thanks, Chair and Minister. Minister, in your time in the Aboriginal portfolio, which severely disadvantaged Indigenous communities have you visited?
Several, actually. I've been to quite a few of the discrete communities that were that are receiving Roads to Home funding from Minister Pavey's portfolio. But in particular, I've been to Walgett, to Brewarrina, to Kaduga, to Burke. I remember them well because I visited them on some of those on more than one occasion.
Yeah, sure.
I've also been to Wallaga Lake and well, actually to the Cultural Centre at Wallaga Lake. I think I should qualify that, but there are probably others, but I can't remember them all
Once
at the
visited,
moment.
they're impossible to forget. And in your observations there and more generally looking at various studies that have been made, do you agree with the proposition in Indigenous affairs that putting disadvantaged people in a disadvantaged place magnifies the extent of the socio-economic disadvantage?
Well, I'd have to think about that a bit more. I mean, I'm certainly not going to reject it, but I don't know that I've reflected enough on that issue myself to make a judgment.
Okay. And just to take you to page 19 of the Treasury document on closing the gap, it reads as follows: of the $1.1 billion of Indigenous-specific expenditure identified in this report, only $302 million, or 27%, has been broken down geographically. So, Minister, isn't there a problem that in 73% of the expenditure areas we don't know what the local impact is, denying government the chance to see if it's being coordinated, place managed the right way, that health, employment, education are all pulling in the one direction? Isn't this another major system failure that needs to be corrected?
And that's something that I've specifically asked AA New South Wales and the delivery agencies to address, and that's one of the key focuses of the data projects. Would you like the Deputy Secretary to speak to that?
Well, I think if we can take on notice, and I would have believed this warrants a ministerial statement in the House, but I think at some stage we need to get a timetable for when all these system failures will be corrected. The financial data platform reporting, the evaluation systems, the local impacts, the Indigenous involvement that's critiqued in this document. So is there a consolidated timetable by which you can tell us how it's going to be fixed?
Well, I can give you an immediate response, which is that closing the gap, as well as, of course, having the Joint Council, also has partnership working group of heads and then officer level working groups. They are literally yesterday, day before yesterday, and I believe today, having a prioritisation workshop to literally go through what they suggest should be in the budget bids for closing the gap for the 2022-2023 allocation in the budget, and these very issues are being discussed at that prioritisation workshop.
Okay, well, it's good they're having a workshop. But Minister, the Treasury report doesn't indicate a lack of budget bids or budget financing of these programs. It points to systemic failure in financial reporting, evaluation, local impact assessment. And
precisely,
and for the most disadvantaged community in New South Wales, we're not getting the best use of public money to solve people who live in absolute circumstances of squalor you wouldn't inflict upon your worst enemy. So shouldn't this be a supreme priority and should have been from day one of this government?
Well, look, that could be said of every New South Wales government since Federation, frankly. But I can tell you this, that in terms of those specific issues you raise, I agree with you They need to be addressed, and that's why when I addressed the prioritisation workshop on Wednesday to say this is what you need to do, I told them to be bold and to be brave and to be focusing on these exact sort of issues so that we can actually change the dial and that we can make, unlike what happened during the last Closing the Gap process, that we can make far more effective and meaningful progress towards achieving those targets than what happened in the past. And that will only be done if we stop doing business as usual. And the people, trust me, who believe that more than anything else is the Aboriginal community themselves, and the Coalition of Peak organisations are absolutely committed to that, and I support them, and their aspirations, and I am endeavouring to make sure that government responds as well.
Workshops aside, is there a consolidated timetable document on when all these problems are going to be fixed?
Don't dismiss it because it's just a workshop.
I'm not dismissing anything. I'm disgusted that this has happened or failed to happen. I'm not dismissing anything. I'm asking for a timetable document that points to the proper public assessment, reporting, evaluation and local impacts that can actually do something meaningful without wasting money to close the gap. Is there a timetable document that sets out when these system failures will be corrected?
It is my expectation that the officer level working groups through the prioritisation workshop will come up with that sort of a plan for Cabinet and its committees to consider for the 2022-2023 budget.
Is this the top priority in all your ministerial work? Because you mentioned this is a problem since Federation, and I'd love to interrogate Ran and Lang and Carl about it, but I can only interrogate you.
No, that's all right.
Why haven't you made it the priority to get it done by now? Are you too busy in the arts or the electoral redistribution?
Look, that's just not worthy of you, Mark.
It really isn't. It is. I'm speaking on behalf of people who needed help from this government. You're the responsible minister, and these are absolute system failures, which in normal circumstances would lead to the minister resigning as a matter of honour.
Would you like to ask a question or just make a speech?
Yes,
because
really honestly, are you too busy in your other portfolio responsibilities like arts and electoral redistribution to give this the priority it deserves?
Point of order, Mr Chair. Look, I'm loath to interrupt. I understand the important point that Mr Latham is making about this issue, but I think it is important that witnesses are treated with respect, and I do think that he's just gone over the line.
Well, I'm asking, is there enough time allocated by the minister to solve this problem? Because it's been festering for 2.5 years on his watch.
Again, now you're just making a speech rather than letting me
I'm asking you a question. You seem to interrupt my questions halfway through. I can finish my question, then you can answer, please.
Just making sure you're finished. Right, good. First of all, it is my top. Closing the gap is absolutely my top focus as Minister for Aboriginal Affairs.
At page 19 of the document, it reads as follows.
And I would like to just make one comment. Oh, no, I won't. I'll let you ask your question.
Page 19 of the Treasury document states as follows. Many First Nations stakeholders express concerns that they do not know what programs or services are available to their communities, and more often than not, were not involved in their design, implementation or evaluation. After 10 years in government, Minister, how can this possibly be the case?
Well, I don't think this is a problem that's limited to this government, but I tell you what, through this Closing the Gap process and through the work that I'm going to undertake as Aboriginal Affairs Minister and Co-Chair of the Joint New South Wales Council, I'm determined to end it.
And will that include addressing the problem on page 20 of the document, reading as follows? In developing this report, it became evident there is currently no central government oversight or enforcement of program evaluations. No central government oversight in this critical area of social equity and fairness, and some would say restitution of Indigenous communities and their opportunities in life. This government has had no oversight or enforcement of program evaluations.
Well, I think it's incumbent upon central agencies to make sure they're doing that. AA New South Wales is certainly going to be doing that, and I believe Treasury needs to be doing it as well and focused on it.
And how many times have you spoken to the Treasurer about Treasury doing that?
I've certainly had a conversation with the new Treasurer about the importance of increasing evaluation, because I don't believe we're getting effective results from the money we expend on Aboriginal programs. It was, in fact, the very first conversation I had with Matt Keane after he was appointed Treasurer, and he is actually Matt Keane is committed to doing. I was about to say he was keen to do something, but is committed to doing something about it as well, because he he's interested in this area of policy.
He's been sworn in a month ago. What about the other 2.5 years of raising it with the Treasurer or the Premier of the day to make this the priority that you claim in your own ministry?
I think that the reality is that the Premier, when he was Treasurer, insisted that Treasury do this work, and he and I think the Deputy Secretary, San
Mitra.
Sen is really pleased the work's been done, and thinks it will be a big step forward in terms of pursuing some of the objectives that you've been referring to in your questions.
Can I just finish up on this subject by saying, if the work's being done, why does the report say that 55% of the Indigenous programs are not being evaluated?
No, the work that has been done that I was referring to is the completion of the report. The particular statistic that you mentioned, I've spoken about extensively in the answers I've already given you. I think raising the percentage of programs that are evaluated is absolutely essential. And I have made that point. I think, as I gave you in answer to your very first question, I have made that point to all of my ministerial colleagues who have Aboriginal programs who I've met with, and very forcefully to their secretaries and deputy secretaries, including, I might say, to Mr. Coates-Trotter in his previous role, where I took issue with some of the evaluation work that had been done in his former cluster, but I was delighted to hear from him that, in fact, it was a little better than we thought. So, in fact, a lot better than we thought.
We might,
so, there it is.
Sorry, Minister. Mr. Field.
Thank you,
Justin,
Chair.
welcome. Where are you? Oh, there you are. Are you at home, Justin?
My work office, of course, at home.
There's nothing,
yes.
Of course.
On the beach.
No, I was just saying it'd be lovely to be down on the south coast right now. But anyway, there you go.
I prefer not to be talking to you, to be honest, Minister, but whilst I've got you, I'd like to talk about the local matter, that being the East Culburra development, which I know you know about, and I appreciate you making your agency available to talk to me about this matter in the past. But I was hoping for an update, if I could, and then I have some specific questions.
For an update. Okay, well, so you would recall that the AHIP was issued back on the 10th of December 2020 for a 14-lot residential subdivision at East Crescent, Culburra, following consultation with the local Aboriginal community, including Jerinja Lauk. The permit was issued to the proponent CLARC with a number of conditions. One of those conditions required archaeological salvage excavation before the start of construction. Those excavations commenced at the beginning of this year. I can advise, as an update, that the excavations are approximately 50% complete, and we have some preliminary results. The preliminary salvage excavation results indicate the area may be more significant than originally believed. The Jerinja Lauk has raised concerns about the high number of stone artefacts and potential hearth features that have been identified, and as you know, they wrote to me on the 7th of May requesting that the permit be revoked. And as you also know, the AHIP holder the proponent, has voluntarily paused all work on site until the result of investigations to date have been considered by the registered Aboriginal parties, including the Gerinja Lauk, and until Heritage New South Wales has made a decision on the request to revoke or amend the AHIP. Heritage New South Wales received a draft interim report on the investigations on the 7th of October 2021. Heritage New South Wales is conducting a readability and accessibility check on the report before it's provided to the registered Aboriginal parties. I think when I refer to readability, that's effectively to de-jargonise it so that it's a more accessible document. I understand that the draft report is likely to be provided to the registered Aboriginal parties by the proponent shortly. At least 28 days will be provided to the registered Aboriginal parties for their review and comment on the draft report. The preliminary reports indicate that the Culburra site is an extensive stone artefact scatter site that's approximately 5,000 years old and extends across the approved development footprint. What were previously thought to be potential hearth features have been shown to be natural storm deposits of pumice. I acknowledge the concerns raised by the Gerinja Lauk and can advise Heritage New South Wales will continue to work with them and to explore opportunities for improved Aboriginal cultural heritage outcomes for the site. And of course, as we have been, we'll be keeping you informed of any major developments.
Minister, just on that that claim, I guess, by you, or that indication by you, and I appreciate that's a prepared note, that those hearths were potentially something else. I mean, that is information that is not yet available to the registered Aboriginal parties. I assume that is contained within this additional study work that's being done that's currently being de-jargonised. I'm just wondering why. I mean, this is a really contentious issue. The Aboriginal parties have asked that the AHIP be revoked. It's been pushed off to these additional studies, and some of this information sort of seems to be being dribbled out there that might go to lessen the arguments in support of...
Well, Justin, with great respect, that wasn't my intention. I was just trying to be helpful to you. I see what you say, and I'll be mindful of that, and I'll raise that concern that you've expressed with Heritage New South Wales to see what we can do about it, but also to make sure that it's finalised as expeditiously as I can so they get that report. But it's not, look, I believe it's not far off.
I appreciate it's not your intent, and it's a prepared note, Minister, but also at the end of your statement there, you suggested that Heritage New South Wales would work with the registered Aboriginal party to improve cultural heritage outcomes. It seems as if, you know, that you're setting up the circumstances for development to go ahead, but we'll look for some other ways to preserve heritage in the area. Well, their request is quite clear. They want the AHIP revoked. You've identified and recognised the significance of the site yourself. The initial diggings have too. You know, this goes back to the questions raised by Ms. Sharp. Is this just going to be another instance where we document the destruction of a significant site?
No, I'm sorry if you've received that impression, Justin. That wasn't my intention, and I can assure you that Heritage New South Wales is going to consider the matter very carefully and make a decision as to whether or not the AHIP should be revoked.
And so what does that process look like, Minister? I'm wondering how they actually weigh up the competing interests here. Have we had a situation where an AHIP has been revoked in New South Wales?
I'd have to take that on notice. But look, I can let you know that the consultation period will run for 28 days, and during the consultation period, the heritage consultants will meet with the Land Council to present the draft report and answer any questions. A final report will be compiled that will include any comments received from the registered Aboriginal parties. Heritage New South Wales is compiling a revised assessment based on the information available to date. The final report and results of consultation will be included in the revised assessment to inform decision making on whether to revoke the permit or to recommence works.
Minister, 28 days, it's taken quite a few months for this additional study to be done. It is a technical document, I understand, and I appreciate it's being simplified in its language, de-jargonised. But is any additional support available to the Geringer to review and understand? Do they get support to get their own technical experts to have a look at this report? There's been a COVID scare down there in recent times. There's a bit of stress in the community. I just want to make sure there's adequate time. We're coming into the Christmas period as well. Adequate time for the community to fairly consider the implications of this report.
Yeah. Well, I think it, just for the benefit of the other members of the committee who aren't as familiar with the project, it is important to remember that that work on East Crescent Culburra is currently paused. This is a voluntary pause by the permit holder, CLARC Proprietary Limited, and there is no construction work that's taking place on the site at the moment. The archaeological site has been stabilised and secured in consultation with the LAUC. In terms of some of the additional support matters that you've raised, I think they're valid. I'm going to ask the Deputy Secretary whether she's got anything she can advise in terms of possible support that might be available, but if she doesn't, we'll be happy to reply on notice. Kate?
Thank you, Minister. I understand that the local Aboriginal Land Council has both legal and heritage consultant support, and we are liaising, Heritage New South Wales is liaising with those expert advisors. If there are any additional things that wish to be brought to my attention, I'm more than happy to have a conversation about those requirements.
Thank you. Minister, just one last one, if I could. The Independent Planning Commission appears to have reached an agreement with CLARC on the West Culburra development that was announced this week. I think it's scheduled to be ratified by the Land and Environment Court today. It's a very disappointing outcome for the community down there, and the Geringer feel like they've just lost one of these battles just today. Losing another one would be quite devastating. So can I just suggest that maybe what we've sort of got this building impact on Aboriginal cultural heritage and development down there, and I wonder how those sorts of cumulative impacts are factored into AHIP decisions.
I think I best take that question on notice, Justin. That's not one I'm able to help you with right now.
Okay, thank you, Minister.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Labor?
Daniel.
Greetings, Minister. Nice to see you as well, and greetings
Good
as well,
morning,
of course,
Daniel.
to you
How
as
are
well.
you?
Always nice to see you, and congratulations, Mr. Secretary, on
Thanks,
your
Mr. Mookie.
appointment, and greetings to the officials who are online as well. Minister, I'm just going to direct these questions at you at first instance, but feel free to delegate them. I think
Yes,
you might need to whoever you see fit. It's the case, is it not, that the Premier is employer of all departmental secretaries under the Government Sector Employment Act?
Yes.
And that has been, the Premier has issued an instrument of delegation to the Secretary of the Department of Premier and Cabinet, that's correct?
Yes.
And that's of continuing effect, and there's been no changes to that delegation throughout this year?
No.
And
I think it might be just appropriate that I let the departmental secretary at this stage
it might be more
answer
efficient
the questions, but I'll reserve the right to.
Of course, Minister, and I will respect that. So the question to you then, Mr. Secretary, is that resolution has been of continuing effect all year uninterrupted?
It's my understanding that's the case, Mr. Mookie.
And does that apply to all agencies heads across the public sector? Are you their direct employer?
So the former Premier Baird delegated to my role the function of terminating the employment, managing the employment and terminating the employment of a secretary of a department.
I'm talking about agency heads, though.
Oh, agency heads. I need to check on that for you, I'm afraid.
Are you the employer of all agency heads of all agencies within the DPC cluster?
No, no.
Which agency head?
There are independent integrity agencies inside the DPC cluster.
Okay, so aside from independent...
And in terms of, for example, the state cultural institutions, the departmental secretary is not their employer.
Okay.
They because they are executive agencies.
Are you the employer of the head of Investment New South Wales?
Yes.
Are you the head of the employer of the Western Sydney Parklands Authority?
Yes.
Okay. And do all DPC policies apply to them?
Need to confirm that for you. I don't know.
Are they subject to all DPC policies and their own policies?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Are they subject to all of DPC policies and their own policies of their own
I would
agency?
need to check that for you, Mr. Mookie.
Fair enough. What is the complaints process that applies to an agency head who's in the DPC cluster?
I will take that on notice because I'm a new arrival, so I don't want
Ms.
to
Foy or Mr. Houston? No?
Not with respect to those agencies, no.
The basic principle would be a complaint against an agency head should not be dealt with within the agency. It should be dealt with outside the agency.
When you say it's a basic principle, is that affected in policy we can infer?
I need to check that for you.
So how does a person who inside those organisations contact DPC to make a complaint?
Well, complaint may be raised within the agency, but it would be appropriate for the agency to have that complaint, the management of that complaint, overseen outside the agency if it is a complaint about the agency head, in order for people to have confidence in the impartiality with which the complaint's dealt with.
So you said it's appropriate, but so can I just infer that that's the policy until otherwise corrected?
I don't have complete confidence that you can. I need to check that.
Okay, sure. And so it's okay for a person to make a complaint within their agency, and then it's the agency's responsibility to notify DPC?
I'll check what arrangements are in place within this cluster. I don't know.
Or to Ms. Foy or to Mr. Houston, to whom would such a notification be made within DPC?
And that's not in my area of responsibility.
So I will invite Mr. Houston if he has any has a response that's a useful response on that to come in.
Thank you for the question. So the nature of how it might be progressed would depend on the nature of the complaint, but if someone has a grievance, normally in the first instance they'd raise their concerns with the immediate manager. I'm not familiar with the specific arrangements in place in different agencies within the DPC cluster.
But how, I appreciate that, Mr. Houston, but Mr. Kustrella, you said that therefore that there'd be an obligation for an agency or an expectation that they would notify DPC. How would they do that?
Usually through the human resources lead, typically. It's my experience in other clusters.
What policy applies to any investigation that's undertaken?
I will find out for you.
What rights are provided to the complainants, and what information is provided to a complainant by DPC when an agency head is being investigated by DPC?
Well, generally complainants should be kept informed of the progress of an investigation, but there are subtle judgments that need to be made about who is told what during the course of an investigation. But then once the investigation is concluded, you should provide information to the complainants about the result of that investigation.
Would you be notified, Mr. Secretary, if a complaint is made about an agency head in your cluster?
Well, it would be my expectation that I would be, yeah.
And would you notify the Premier?
It depends.
You have discretion, or are you obliged?
I need to check that. I think I would have discretion.
Okay. Would you have an obligation to notify the Minister of the relevant agency head?
I think you would apply judgment to that.
But you have discretion?
I would imagine so, yes.
Would you be responsible of notifying the board of the organisation if such a complaint had been received?
Well, boards come in various forms, so I think I know the organisation you're talking about. The board is an advisory rather than the governing board, in my understanding. It would be a matter of judgment.
Okay.
Yep.
And in respect to the outcome of an investigation, would you be obliged to report to the Premier, the Minister and the board, or is that also matters of discretion?
It would be a matter of discretion and judgment.
Okay. Can I ask, do you meet with the heads, as the employer of the head of Investment New South Wales and Western Sydney Parkland Authority, how often does the Secretary meet with them?
I'm planning to meet with those people probably every 2 to 3 weeks.
And so they are effectively your direct reports. Do you accept that?
Yeah.
Okay. And so you would carry out all the functions of an employer that would ordinarily be expected under the Act, I presume?
We'll double check, Mr. Mookie, but I think so, yes.
Yes, okay, thank you very much. Did DPC earlier this year receive notifications of complaints from the Western Sydney Parklands Authority about the conduct of its CEO?
I need to check that for you, I don't know.
Can I ask that to either Mr. Houston or anyone else who might have that information?
I wouldn't be aware.
Am I on mute or not? I have no knowledge of that.
Is anyone from DPC aware about whether or not DPC was notified by the Western Sydney Parklands Authority that complaints had been received about the CEO?
I would make this point to you, Daniel. They are not part of my ministerial remit, and the officials of DPC that are on this call, other than Mr. Coots-Trotter, are all in support of my portfolios, not Investment New South Wales or Western Sydney Parkland, which are not within my portfolio.
Minister, you are responsible for the General Sector Employment Act, are you not?
Yes, but that's responsibility for the Act. That doesn't mean that I have specific duties in relation to all of those, those particular agencies.
But insofar as you are making a point as to whether or not these questions relate, it's the case, is it not, that the conduct that's expected of a senior executive is provided for in that Act?
Yes, it is.
And therefore questions can be directed about whether that Act is being complied about.
Please understand me. I wasn't making that point to say your questions were out of order. I would have happily taken a point of order if I thought they were out of court.
You're not allowed to take that, so you need to rev those guys up.
Simply making the point that other than the Secretary,
Is here to answer
people are not specific, and of course the Public Service Commissioner, who's also on the line. There aren't necessarily people on this call who can help you with questions about another ministerial portfolio.
So I made a few phone calls this morning, as you can imagine, ahead of this estimate. So, the Western Sydney Parklands Authority moved into the DPC cluster from the Treasury cluster. I think when the authority became aware of allegations against its CEO, out of habit, it contacted the Treasury through the Treasury Human Resources lead and not DPC. So I think the first point of contact was to the Treasury.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. That's very helpful. But that took place circa June this year?
I need to check that for you, Mr. Mookie.
And did that follow 3 complaints being made about the conduct of the Secretary?
There were 3 email complaints about the conduct of the Chief Executive of the Authority, which were investigated and which were found to be not substantiated. And I think it is pretty unfair on her to continue to chew away at something that, in my view, has been appropriately and independently investigated.
Well, I appreciate that, Secretary, but Secretary, 2 days ago, she was telling me to refer all these questions to you, so here I am.
Terrific.
And so, just step this through step by step. 3 complaints were received via email. Yep. I presume that was to the Parklands Authority, is that correct?
I can find that out for you, so test your assumption.
Did the Parklands Authority itself then hire a firm by the name of Intrique, INTRIQUE,
yes,
to investigate?
So my understanding, and I'll confirm on the record, is that the Parklands Authority sought advice from Treasury about who it could approach to undertake an independent investigation. Treasury recommended this organisation that I'm not familiar with, but Intrique. I think they were appointed on the 22nd of June, and DPC became aware of it and took over the oversight of the investigation on the 24th of June, as is appropriate for the reasons I explained earlier.
What was the cost?
Don't know. I can find out for you.
Thank you very much. And did that what was the evidentiary standard that Intrigue was told to apply?
The Briginshaw test, the civil standard, balance of probabilities, which is usual in matters of this nature.
Against which policy?
I'll check that for you.
Thank you. And did that lead investigator at any point ask a DPC for permission to expand their investigation into Dr. Hill's tenure as CEO of the Greater Sydney Commission after, in the course of their investigation, identifying matters that may require further exploration?
I don't know, but I'm happy to check.
Did DPC refuse the investigator's request to expand the investigation into Dr. Hill's time at the Greater Sydney Commission?
I don't know.
Who from DPC was responsible for overseeing this investigation?
My understanding was that it was one of my Deputy Secretary colleagues, Samara Dobbins, who is the head of the HR function in DPC.
And she was reporting to Mr. Reardon, was that not the case?
She was a direct report to Mr. Reardon.
And was she keeping Mr. Reardon directly informed?
I can't speak for her. I'll find out.
Did Mr. Reardon, was he the person who communicated the outcome of the investigation to the complainants?
I will find out. I don't know.
When you say it was unsubstantiated, what do you mean by that, Mr. Secretary?
I mean, I've read the executive summary of the investigator's report, and it says allegation 1 not substantiated, allegation 2 not substantiated, allegation 3 not substantiated. Recommendations: I recommend that DPC considers advising the respondent, Ms. Hill, of the outcome of the independent investigation, advising the witnesses of the outcome of this independent investigation, including observations made in this report.
Can I just take you through what those observations are? Let me put them to you. Did the investigator make the following observation? That Dr. Hill should consider training and or mentoring in relation to her personal communication style when meeting with staff and addressing staff who attend board meetings?
I would need to check because I've only read as far as I recounted to.
Is it the next paragraph there, Mr. Secretary?
No, I asked for the executive summary and the recommendations. That's all I've got.
But, okay, well, feel free to take them on notice. But the question specifically that I'd like you to take on notice is, did they make that observation to or a recommendation to Dr. Hill that she consider training or mentoring for the respondent relating to her personal communication style when meeting with staff and addressing staff who attend board meetings? That's the first one.
I'm happy to check that for you.
The second one I'd like you to check, if you don't mind, Mr. Secretary, is can you check whether or not the investigator recommended that they consider conducting a workplace cultural assessment utilising staff surveys to evaluate the emotions and attitudes of staff and how the leadership and management team of the authority are viewed?
I will confirm.
Thank you. Can you also confirm, Mr. Secretary, whether or not they recommended consider a face-to-face retreasure training for Dr. Hill and the authority for the code of conduct throughout the authority that includes a focus on core values?
Again, I'm happy to confirm
and
that.
And finally, can you confirm whether or not the observation or recommendation was made that they consider implementing a whistleblower hotline for staff and customers to access, if required? Options for do so might include a hyperlink on the authority's intranet and or website to take anonymous complaints about the behaviour of the executive of that authority.
I'm happy to check that.
So can you also perhaps provide an explanation now or later as to, if you say that this was all unsubstantiated, why any such observations or recommendations would have been made?
Well, that is a puzzle because the report is clear that the allegations were unsubstantiated, and I do want to keep stressing that on the record because with the information available to me, there is a lot of smearing of Hill's reputation. And we've got a report that says allegations were unsubstantiated.
Yes, and I also have numerous people telling me that this investigation wasn't fair, Mr. Secretary. Hence the questions.
Well, the investigators turned in a written report. They put their name to it. They signed off on it. That was the finding.
And what were their terms of reference?
I will check that for you.
Who came up with their terms of reference?
I think I probably have those, but they're long. I will provide them to you on notice.
Thank you very much. And who determined the terms of reference?
Don't know. Find out.
Thank you. Can I ask, has the department or the public service completed its people surveys matter for this year?
The People Matter Employee Survey, yes, we have.
When will the results of that be public?
They are being published in iterations. My colleague, Katharina Lowe, might be able to... You're interested in when the results of the authority's PMES?
No, at this point, I'm across all the public sector, but then we'll get to the authority.
Okay. Sorry, I might pass to my colleague, Ms. Lowe.
Full Hansard, Katharina Lowe. The PMES, People Matter Employee Survey, results have been passed to all of the departments and agencies, so they all have their results packs and the results packs will be published on the PSC website on the 8th of November. I can tell you that the employee engagement score for the authority was 61, and that's up 2 points from last year.
And yes, but the year previous, did it drop by 30 points?
I don't have that information at hand.
Can you take on notice?
My recollection is that there was some drop-off. I can't confirm the figure, but the view was, if I recall correctly, that there was a COVID effect on the response rate. But we'll take that on notice.
On notice, do you mind, Minister, therefore, confirming that the report survey that took place in the authority last year had 65 respondents?
Sorry, on which
Western
authority?
Sydney Parklands Authority.
Oh, I can't speak for exactly that particular authority. I thought that you were referring to the survey responses overall. I apologise, and if that was your question, then I'll withdraw the answer that
Thank you, Minister. I appreciate that. But perhaps for you, Mr. Secretary, or the Public Sector Service Commissioner, as you see fit, can you confirm that last year's People Survey report, as it applies to the Western Sydney Parkland Authority, reported a drop of circa 30 points on broad satisfaction by employees in that organisation?
Just to be specific, on the staff engagement score? I don't know.
In general, relative to the Treasury cluster for which it was benchmarked, there was about a 17% negative spread across most criteria, and equally the same between that and the public sector. And finally, that there was a 30 to 40 point drop across most criteria that was detected in the People Matter survey last year as it applied to that authority. Do you mind checking on that?
Happy to.
Thank you very much. That's it from me.
Thank you. Minister, this is probably better directed to Ms. Harwin of the Opera House. How long has the concert hall been closed at the Opera House?
Well, I think I will get Louise to just answer that.
Thank you, Ms.
I can
Harwin.
probably assist you.
Okay.
But I do reserve the right to answer questions, but that one, Louise, feel free.
So, Ms. Harwin, can you bring me up to speed on the concert hall? How long has it been closed?
The concert hall was closed in February last year, and so it's now been closed for about 18 months, coming up to 2 years.
Now, is it correct that it was scheduled to reopen in February?
Yes, that is correct. It was scheduled to reopen in February.
So, what is now the new opening date?
We've been working very closely with the Sydney Symphony Orchestra, who we look forward very much to welcoming back to the concert hall. And after considering all the many COVID risks that we have faced in the course of the works, we've agreed, and they have launched their season brochure showing a July reopening.
July 2022.
July 2022, which is about 5 months later, 4 or 5 months later than originally planned.
What was the reason for the delay in the renovations?
Yeah, certainly. So, as you know, there have been severe COVID impacts, particularly on works. So, we've suffered as a result of the international and domestic border closures. We have suffered because of delays in supply chain. Also, when the general shutdown occurred in July this year, we were closed for 2 weeks, and following that, about 50% of the workers on site came from the 12 LGAs affected, the LGAs that were affected that people couldn't travel from, and also a lot of the work that is being done in those LGAs, and so that work was halted. And it's not as if once those restrictions come off, we're immediately able to gear up fully. Yeah. And we continue to suffer, for example, from the closure of international borders because some of the majority of the theatre equipment following a public tender comes from Wagner Bureau in Austria. And they have had a lot of difficulty in getting people here, despite our working closely with the Austrian ambassador and DFAT to bring the engineers, particularly the commissioning engineers, to the site.
Now, have there been any financial impacts in the sense of compensation that the Opera House has had to pay to the SSO?
No, there hasn't.
There hasn't. They're not seeking any.
There hasn't.
They haven't. Okay.
There hasn't been. No compensation has been paid to the SSO for delay.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. That's the end of my time. Went over. Okay. Can I keep going, or is that the end of my time?
I'm sorry, Chair. I'm just going to have to ask for another short break. I'll make it as snappy as I possibly can.
Okay.
No problem.
Stop the clock.
Stop the clock.
Stop the clock.
This is chewing into government question time now.
Only 7.5 minutes left, Ben.
That's all right. I can do it in that time.
Ready?
Oh, thanks. Minister, nice to see you. And I appreciate it being reflected back. That's good. The Minister, what is the actual cost of the construction contract with Lease for the Powerhouse Museum?
$845 million.
Well, that's
sorry.
That's a lot. That's gone up from 400. So that's a lot.
Right. You asked me the construction cost as opposed to the cost of the actual project. Quite right.
More than doubled.
I beg your pardon?
More than doubled. It was meant to be 400.
No. I was talking to the total. When I gave you that figure, it was the total cost of the program. I misunderstood your question, and I apologise for that.
And
okay,
Mr. Fitzgerald, just for the record, congratulations are in order, but careful what you ask for. But congratulations.
Thanks very much.
Well, Minister, if it helps, there are rumours abounding that it's well over the $400 million that was originally budgeted for. Does that help?
Let me take that at this stage, that question on notice, but I'll hopefully have an answer for you on the actual, to the extent I'm able to give you by the end of the session, as I've foreshadowed to other members.
The reason I'm asking is normally by this stage, do you know when the contract was signed with Lend-Lease?
Lend-Lease was appointed as the main works builder on the 17th of September 2021, and they're responsible for the detailed design and construction of the Powerhouse Parramatta.
Normally, we would see details about the contract disclosed within a month of a contract being entered into. I can't find any details on either the procurement website or the planning website.
I'll invite the Deputy Secretary to comment on that.
INSW are the signatories to the contract, the build contract with Lend-Lease, as they're the delivery agency working with us. We'll attempt to get in contact with INSW on the date, but normally you're correct, Mr. Shoebridge, there is the publication of those contractual documents per any of the relevant guidelines, but I'll attempt to get back to you by the end of the session. If not, we'll take that on notice.
But Ms. Foy, you're the client, so you must know what the contract price is. They wouldn't have entered into a contract without saying.
I don't have it in front of me or on the top of my head, I'm afraid. As you can see, there's considerable information, but I will get that to you.
We are managing about $2.5 billion worth of infrastructure projects at the moment. Apologies if we don't have every figure on the top of our head.
But I'm asking you about one project that is in the order of 20% of that, so that's why.
I'll get that figure for you.
And we've undertaken to do. We've made undertakings in that respect.
Can I ask you, Ms. Foy, is that contract just for the base build? Is there a separate contract for the fit out?
I'll get back to you on that, or I might ask Ms. Pittman if she's able to talk about that. But the build cost is the Lend-Lease. The fit out would be, I suspect, shared between contractors because these fit out has different components to it, as you know. But I'll get back to you on that, Mr. Shoebridge, about the scope. I think just to clarify what I'm getting back to you on, the contract with Lend-Lease, contract cost, the time of its publication, the scope of the work, and where the scope of the work for the fit out.
Yes, that's right. And if you do have if there is a contract for the fit out, the contract cost for the fit out.
Of course. Yep.
Minister, are you aware that the Heritage Council and the National Trust both raised very real concerns with the failure of New South Wales planning to consider the Aboriginal heritage associated with the Ravensworth homestead and the surrounds, where there are Aboriginal massacre sites, in granting the approval to destroy that landscape and to relocate the Ravensworth homestead? Are you aware of those concerns?
Obviously, Heritage New South Wales is very interested in that particular development. I can provide some information on that. I'm not specifically briefed on, though, whether the National Trust raised any concerns.
Can I ask you, why did Heritage New South Wales not provide a submission or not provide information to New South Wales Planning about the critical both Aboriginal and colonial heritage? But I suppose my focus here is particularly on the Aboriginal heritage that is going to be destroyed if that Glencore extension is permitted?
I'm going to have to take that question on notice.
Minister, and I appreciate that, but the reason I'm asking you is there are a series of recorded and documented massacre sites surrounding the Ravensworth homestead, which under an approval granted by New South Wales Planning under state significant development are going to be destroyed, utterly destroyed. And yet Aboriginal Affairs, New South Wales Heritage, nobody made a submission about the Aboriginal heritage on that site. Do you know how that happened?
I will take that on notice. I'm not sure that that's correct, so I'll check it for you and respond on notice.
Minister, do you accept that there's something very, very wrong in Aboriginal heritage protection laws when massacre sites can be destroyed without any actual consideration in a planning process?
I think it's obvious that I can't make any judgment about the assertions that you're making, given that I've had to take the previous line of questioning on notice.
Minister, what's the current delivery date for the Sydney Modern? What's the expected delivery date?
Well, it's Sydney Modern, which is, of course, a wonderful project, is going despite the COVID delays, according to schedule. And I'm advised that it's on track to be delivered within budget in late 2022, as anticipated.
So my office has been contacted by people who have had concerns that there's a 6-month delay. Can you allay those concerns and say that those concerns are not...
Any delays, David, have been minor, and it is on track to be finished as planned.
On schedule?
Yes, as I stated. And when I say in late 22, that's the whole project, not just the build section. The build section will be finished even earlier than that. That'll be finished by mid next year, and then there's a fit-out period that follows it.
Minister, has the Creative Kids program been undersubscribed?
No, I don't think I would say that. I would say, if anything, it's going faster than being spent faster than you would expect, given the amount applied to the program and the length of years it's being spent over.
Sorry.
I can give you more information on that, but I'm just going to give you quick answers.
Could you provide that on notice, the details about the spend on Creative Kids?
Well, I'm just very... look, I can tell you quickly...
I don't require any further information on that. If you could provide it on notice, that actually would be helpful. So can you tell me then when the expected opening date for Sydney Modern is? Have we got an opening? Have we got a date?
Well, it's as I said to you, it's late 2022.
That's the opening date?
That's the opening, absolutely. It'll be opening then.
Minister, you will be aware that the report's been delivered about the heritage referral that you gave to the Social Issues Committee. And I know there's 6 months to respond to that. But one of the...
We'll be responding a lot faster than 6 months, trust me.
Yes.
You will recall that I was the one who gave them the reference, and I gave it to them for a purpose, because I wanted stakeholder input before I finalised my cabinet.
You're pushing against an open door. I think that was a useful process. I think that's good. But Minister, one of the loudest messages that we got from pretty much every stakeholder was that the pressing need is actually to get standalone Aboriginal heritage laws in place where Aboriginal people are making the decision about Aboriginal heritage. When will they be in place?
This was asked earlier by the Honourable Penny Sharp, and I would refer you to the answer I gave to her.
Did you give a date? for the did you give a date?
Yes, I gave. Well, I didn't give a calendar date. No,
We're seeing a bill sometime before the end of the year, maybe.
No, I think I said that my expectation is that it'd be available for consultation after Christmas.
After Christmas and before New Year's, or
good try, David. No,
but
in the new year.
But before,
in the new year.
before the next parliamentary sitting starts. So in that period.
I'd certainly hope that would be the case, but if you had been here at the time, you would have heard me say that Cabinet agendas are pretty full at the moment, and I'm hoping that it will go to Cabinet before this year, and therefore have it available for people to look at, and for it to be open to consultation early next year. That's what I'd like to see happen, but I'm not the master of the process.
I accept
okay?
Thanks, Mr.
Chair,
and of course, it also depends upon whether Cabinet's happy with it, and it goes straight out. It may need some work. We'll wait and see.
Chair, sorry, a quick point of order. I thought I heard Mr Secord say that he had no more questions for Ms Herron, and I thought if that was the case and other members didn't, perhaps we could let her go. But it was just...
Yeah, okay. Yep. Release Ms Herron. Release Ms Herron. That's very fair. We release Ms
Early mark for Louise.
Thanks for the early mark.
Don't blame her.
Bye.
What about the Everest?
All right.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks,
Mark. Here we go again.
Yes.
Right, good.
In reference to the 129 programs, over $1 billion of expenditure in the preparation of the Treasury Indigenous Expenditure report, they did consultations and concluded that participants observed that in many instances service delivery providers are not meeting the needs and expectations of the communities they are serving. Some participants noted they are simply ticking a box and leaving, a reference to our public servants and service deliverers, simply ticking a box and leaving, a sentiment that is further perpetuated by a lack of community engagement. So what's being done to solve that particular problem?
Well, that sort of behaviour isn't acceptable, and it should be addressed. I certainly agree with that, and like everything that's contained in the Indigenous Expenditure report, these matters will be pursued with other clusters by Aboriginal Affairs New South Wales to make sure there's meaningful engagement.
More generally in the public service, and perhaps Mr Coates-Trotter could reflect on this, there has been an effort in various agencies to do things that are Indigenous related. For instance, Treasury has staff reconciliation groups, although when I've asked them, they haven't identified any staff who are not reconciled to Indigenous people. DPI has had a Bruce Pascoe book, Fiction Club, and readings. And there's other virtue signalling activities about Invasion Day, blah, blah, blah. Wouldn't it be a lot better, in light of this critique of simply ticking a box and leaving, to get back to the basic public sector delivery of professional, cost-efficient service delivery where it matters most for disadvantaged Indigenous communities, to set the virtue signalling and the feel-good programs aside and get back to what should be the core business of the public sector, to deliver these services without the insult of ticking a box and leaving? Minister and Premier's Chief, please.
I thought you were asking the Secretary.
Well, I'll ask both of you. You're Minister for Public Service and Indigenous Affairs, and I'm just saying, for all this effort in one space, haven't we overlooked the core function of the public sector to professionally, in a cost-efficient way, deliver the services without the tick and flick approach?
Well, I think I've answered that question. That was your previous question.
Okay. Right. Well, Mr Coates-Trotter, any response to this particular problem?
Yes, of course. So there is, to your suggestion that these two things are sort of, you know, there's virtue signalling and there's doing the real business. I think sometimes the things you describe as virtue signalling are actually highly valued by Aboriginal communities we work with and Aboriginal colleagues on staff. So days that allow organisations like my former organisation of DCJ to reflect on its history in removing Aboriginal kids is a really important thing to do. It wins trust with Aboriginal communities. It wins respect from Aboriginal staff, and that makes the organisation better able to do good public service work with and for Aboriginal people. So I don't think the two things are necessarily in conflict. I do think the latter is more important. You've got to have a public service that is equipped with people who understand the job is to deliver the best possible response on a local level, reflecting the needs of the local community they work in.
Do you think it's true, though, that we've got to an era where there wouldn't be people in our public work who are unsympathetic to the Indigenous cause, and naturally any human being visiting these hellholes and places of squalor where your stomach turns and, you know, your tears well up, thinking, how can people in our modern, reasonably wealthy society just live like this? It's just so cruel and unfair. So there's no lack of empathy. Haven't we just, so, you know, the programs you talk about, are they really in dispute? Is that a contested sphere as opposed to the professional, cost-efficient, effective service delivery that the communities are calling out for rather than tick and flick?
So the latter is hugely important. It's the main game. But I know from talking with Aboriginal colleagues that they experience racism at work. It is a fact of their working life. It might be soft racism, it might be people just having a blind spot, not understanding what they're saying or doing, but sometimes it's hardcore, old-fashioned racism. And we kid ourselves if we don't we're not honest about that, and we don't try and tackle that where we find it. So, yes, by and large, people come to public service motivated for the very best reasons, but it's not always the case, and it can be a tough place to work for Aboriginal staff, and we have to be honest about that.
Well, what proportion do you think of the public service A, soft racist, or B, hard racist?
A tiny fraction, but it's in the People Matter employee survey. It's in staff surveys. We know it's an issue. I'm not saying it's the overriding character of the public service. Absolutely not, nor the overriding character of society. But it's there. It's real. It has to be tackled. I think we can do both.
Minister, on page 22 of the report, they lament the fact that of the 37 state outcomes in the Premier's priorities, there's only one for relating specifically to Indigenous communities. Are you open to the idea of taking perhaps what might be thought of as the more critical closing the gap targets, the 16 of them, take some of those and add them to the Premier's priorities to give them improved profile and emphasis in our state government work?
Well, may I say the Premier's, I haven't had a chance to discuss with the new Premier what and he hasn't advised Cabinet yet what, if any, changes there will be to Premier Berejiklian's priorities. I think I'm correct in
I think he's
that.
Yes.
And it may well be that he's going to make some adjustments there. But look, I think the closing the gap targets are very good targets, and I note that there was an education Premier's priority in relation to Aboriginal education. It was a good one, and it reflects in part one of the closing the gap targets, and I think it would be appropriate that there be some more. Well, no, I withdraw that. I think we should. I think I would want to wait until I'd had a discussion with the new Premier as to how he saw Premier's priorities working before I was able to give you a definitive answer as to the question you asked.
Yeah, well, that's fair enough. You'd expect the new Premier may well have new and different priorities. And hopefully expanded priorities that takes in some of these close the gap targets. Do you think generally, though, that putting them in the Premier's priorities would add to the emphasis inside the government to reach these 16 critical
possibly it might,
targets,
but I have to
particularly the
say,
ones about life expectancy and the birth of healthy babies?
Yeah, look, I have to say, I think that I'm detecting a very strong support from across clusters and amongst my colleagues for actually acting on the closing the gap targets. I'm not sure that it necessarily would add more emphasis, but I wouldn't say that it won't. I just would like to say that I'm really pleased with the way my colleagues and the agencies are engaging in what, when all is said and done, is a national agreement signed off by the Prime Minister and the previous Premier.
Right, if I can just take you to the Treasury reporting on, well, rudimentary progress, if any, aligning expenditure to closing the gap targets. They've listed some outcomes here, aligning generally with some of the closing the gap targets and added a few more. Can I just ask what the government is doing in these areas specifically to try and improve the outcomes? Outcome 4 listed here on page 25, children thrive in their early years. The fact that in New South Wales only 42% of Indigenous students, Indigenous children are developmentally on track in the domain set out for early childhood development, just 2 in 5.
Yes, it's reflecting on all of those statistics is very sobering and sometimes very disturbing as well. Look, as I said, I am as Minister for Aboriginal Affairs, and AA New South Wales' role is to coordinate work across the clusters in terms of all of those outcomes and targets, and make sure that progress is, if anything, exceeding the trajectory we need to reach those targets. In relation to that specific area, I'd invite either the Secretary or the Deputy Secretary to reflect upon it. If they don't have anything to add, we'd be happy to take it on notice.
Well, there's the measure of the Australian Early Development Census and Index, and I think that's probably the data you're referring to, and I think there's new data soon to arrive. It's not a happy story comparing Aboriginal kids to non-Aboriginal kids in New South Wales, but when you compare New South Wales to other states and territories from memory, actually it's a much stronger comparison. So the relative position of Aboriginal kids in New South Wales is better from memory than the Australian average and those of other states and territories, which is not to say it's good enough or doesn't need to improve.
Okay. Thank you. Minister, just a couple of quick questions before I pass on to my colleague Penny Sharp. Minister, the private fundraising arrangements involving Parramatta Powerhouse. Now, from memory, $20 million from Lang Walker, $10 million from Western Sydney University.
Correct.
So that leaves, of a $75 million fund, that leaves $45 million remaining. Is it correct that you've been unable to secure that remaining $45 million?
Oh, no, not at all. It most certainly isn't correct.
Well, can you share that with us?
We deliberately have decided to lead with those two donations, which are extremely significant, and in relation to one part of the Powerhouse's future mission, which is, of course, the Academy. But I have every confidence that we'll be able to meet the $75 million target. And to that effect, we've set up a fundraising committee. Lease is on the call, isn't it? Yeah. I don't want to just take up your time, but I mean, Lisa would be able to expand on the work that's being done under the chairmanship of Tony Shepherd, who's chairing the appeal committee.
My question is very simple,
and it's very. Yes,
Ms. Havelock could maybe answer this. My question is very straightforward and simple. So, $20 million from Lang Walker, $10 million from Western Sydney University. So that leaves $45 million. So, rather than going through the details of the fundraising committee, I would like to know, yes or no, is that $45 million still not forthcoming from the private sector?
Well, I think we have good plans to raise the remainder of that target and the target that's being put in place for Ultimo. And based on the extraordinary response we've had from the New South Wales community, including both business and philanthropists for our other arts infrastructure projects, we have every confidence that they'll be met. We not only reached our $100 million target for Sydney Modern, we exceeded it. We've reached our targets for Walsh Bay. They had philanthropy targets as well. We've exceeded it. For Project Discover at the Australian Museum, we exceeded that target. And I think you should assume that we'll do well and maybe even exceed both targets at the Powerhouse.
One last question. The Willow Grove being housed at Wetherill Park.
Well, I actually don't know where it's being housed, but I have every faith in Infrastructure New South Wales to do the right thing in ensuring that that's disassembled, protected while it's being stored, and then reassembled appropriately at a future time after the Powerhouse reference, the Willow Grove reference group has considered and given advice on where it might be located.
Well, in response to written questions on notice from previous committee, it is being housed at Wetherill Park.
Well, thanks. I probably should have recalled, but I didn't.
One last question. So what is the final budget for the disassembling Willow Grove, putting it in storage, keeping it there, and then reassembling it at a later date? What is the total budget for that?
I've given figures for that at the moment, but until we have
the reason I'm asking is I'm checking to see if they've changed.
But until we actually have a location, until we know which year it will be built in, until we know what the construction costs will be, it's just not. It's pointless giving you a figure.
Ms. Foy, you must have a budget figure.
It's as the Minister said. I think it's premature to put a budget figure on it. Of course, we have a full program budget, and we do what we can to manage.
Thank you, Ms. Foy.
That's okay.
Ms. Sharp?
Just see if they're going to give you something.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, Penny.
All right, on notice. Okay, great. I want to go back to Aboriginal fishing rights.
Oh, yeah.
Minister, are you aware that the state government has agreed for the New South Wales abalone industry to increase its 100-tonne annual quota?
I'd have to take. Well,
do you know or not?
I can say look. I am not aware of it. I haven't been briefed on it, and I'd be happy to take any questions you have about it on notice.
Yeah, well, the issue is that while you're doing that, so that sort of decision wouldn't necessarily come to Cabinet, would it, Minister?
Well, I wouldn't discuss.
All right, sure.
What takes place in Cabinet.
Do your cabinets? Well, that's fine. This is a process question. Do your cabinet minutes have an Aboriginal First Nations people impact consideration as part of the minutes?
Well, AA has referred to it. The entire forward agenda of Cabinet, and AA comments on any Cabinet minute that has a potential relevance to Aboriginal people. That happens as a matter of course.
Sure. Okay, well then my question is, it really goes to, I mean, there's been 2 recent prosecutions of Aboriginal people for doing cultural fishing. A 74-year-old man who had some abalone, and there's a man, I think down the far south coast, who had 2 small bags. He's looking at being banned from fishing for 5 years and or a jail term. What input, if any, has your department or others had in trying to stop the prosecution of Aboriginal people for doing cultural fishing practices?
I'll respond to that question on notice.
Well, while you're doing that then, I mean, Minister, you've signed the Closing the Gap agreement, which is obviously about trying to reduce Aboriginal people in the criminal justice system, and yet people, we've passed the Fisheries Management Act, which was supposed to recognise the cultural fishing rights of Aboriginal people across this state. It has never commenced, over a decade, still not commenced. There are Aboriginal people getting prosecuted for small amounts of what I think everyone would agree is cultural fishing practice, and yet you've done nothing.
Well, it's not correct to say that the government has done nothing.
Well, I'm asking you, Minister. You haven't met with the Fisheries Minister. You haven't met with the Fisheries Minister, and you're not aware about the abalone quota. No one from your department seems to be able to tell me about whether they're aware of this. This has massive impact on prosecution rates and fear of prosecution of Aboriginal people trying to practice their own cultural fishing rights, which we have recognised in the Parliament.
I've promised to provide the answers to those questions on notice.
Okay, thank you, Minister. I'd like to go fishing too, with my licence. Minister, I wanted to, if I can just ask you about we were speaking in the previous session about the jobs lost at Heritage New South Wales. Are any of those going to be regional jobs? Okay.
I'll take that on notice.
Thank you. Minister, can you, and I'm not sure, it might be one for Mr Coates-Trotter. I ask this question quite frequently. What is the efficiency dividend being applied across the agencies in this cluster?
Secretary.
So I would usually be familiar with that, Ms Sharp, but I'm yet to get my head around that, so I'll take it on notice and respond to you.
Thank you. My understanding it was 3%, but yes, if you could provide it on notice for each of the agencies and the dollar amount that they'll be required to find for the end of 2021, that would be great. Sorry, 2022. Thank you. Minister, how many, I want to ask about domestic violence leave and the provision of it within the public service. I'm actually just wanting to understand if we've got any figures on how many people have actually accessed that leave.
We don't. I did ask this question, Ms Sharp. There's no central gathering of that information, so we'd have to go to individual agencies to ask the question, but I'll just look into my colleague, Katharina Lowe. I think we should do that.
Katharina Lowe,
obviously happy for you to take it on notice.
Yeah, that's right, what the Secretary has said. It's not centrally collected.
So we'll take it on notice then. Okay. Thank you.
Terrific, thank you. I wanted to ask a question. So this is a COVID-related question.
Yep.
Rapid antigen testing. With there's a massive increase in rapid antigen testing, and all of us have had it this morning. And the rollout of home testing kits. Do you expect that essential and frontline workplaces will still be required to provide rapid testing for their workers?
So I think that will depend on the setting. So in prisons and youth justice, for example, where the consequences of COVID transmission within the centre are so significant, it could well be that rapid antigen screening remains a fact of life for the foreseeable future. I know, for example, in schools in Albury during the latest outbreak, rapid antigen screening is being used as a pilot, picking up on the UK government's approach where you test kids to enable them to come to school rather than being isolated at home and denied face-to-face schooling. So I think there will be a range of responses that will make use of rapid antigen screening, but I don't think it'll be uniform.
And for essential and frontline workplaces, I mean, that makes sense. If people are sort of moving to home testing, is there any plans to look at compensating workers who will be required to purchase at-home testing?
I'll take that one on notice. I'm not. To date, employers have paid the cost of rapid antigen testing. Yeah.
So you would anticipate that would
I
stay.
I'm
really asking for that change as we move out of it, whether that's going to be required, but people are going to be whether the cost is going to be shifted onto individual workers for at-home testing.
I'll take that one on notice. But
Thank you.
Yeah.
That is very helpful. Sorry. I want to ask about casualisation within the New South Wales public sector. I'm wanting to, post-COVID, I'm really trying to understand what has happened. Given COVID will require long-term attention, will casual public sector workers who have had their employment contracts extended beyond 12 months due to COVID-19 be offered full-time or permanent positions?
I'll take that on notice, but I think that there won't be a blanket response to that. That will depend on the needs of different departments and agencies, but we'll come back to you.
And can you give it, there's a lot of concern about gig economy and insecure work. What are the plans across government to convert casual positions to permanent work over temporary work?
I'd need to take that on notice, I'm afraid. Yeah.
Okay. Are you able to provide the committee information in relation to staffing caps across the key agencies?
So I take it you're referring to the employee-related expenses cap that is applied?
No, agency staff cap.
Oh, okay. Yes, I'll take that one on notice unless either my colleague Katharina Lowe or my colleague Charlie Houston want to answer.
Katharina Lowe for Hansard. I don't have any information on staffing caps. That's still not a term that I'm familiar with. We use the term labour expense cap, so perhaps we need a bit of clarification.
Yeah.
Sure, I'll do that on notice. That's fine. No, that's fine. Sorry, my apologies. So I now want to talk about COVID and obviously the impact on Aboriginal communities. And I'm told in good news that Wilcannia has zero cases at the moment, which I believe is true, which is great. Some Aboriginal medical services have raised concerns that Aboriginal Affairs was not supporting funding applications to increase staff or facilities to assist with coping with the pandemic. Are you aware of that issue, Minister?
I'd be very surprised if that was the case, but I will ask the Deputy Secretary to comment on that, and I just want to pay tribute in particular to the work that she and Lil Gordon, the head of AA, have done on COVID. It's the value that's been added to the work of Commonwealth Health and New South Wales Health by AA, in particular some of the place-based responses, has been very valuable. But Kate, can you help?
Thank you, yeah, more than happy to help. So firstly, if I can say that the COVID response, it's a health response. It's a health-led, health-managed response. The federal government is in the lead with this, and they provide... so the federal government vaccination strategy is the primary source of channels for vaccines, whether that's through Aboriginal medical services, GPs, pharmacies, the use of the ADF to support our Royal Flying Doctor Service. So that's largely the domain of the Commonwealth. The New South Wales health approach is supports that Commonwealth-led approach, and that's through largely the local area, the local health districts. The role of Aboriginal Affairs and Premier and Cabinet is to make sure that there is a coordination of the range of services available in local communities, firstly to make sure that Aboriginal voices are part of the solution, secondly to support getting a solution to get jabs in arms, and the other support systems that are required to support Aboriginal communities, whether it's tailored communications, food boxes and food delivery, the provision of protective equipment, sure. Thanks. So I know there was an enormous amount of grants, and I'm happy to go to the grants. So we have $18.7 million allocated to the Department of Premier and Cabinet to mitigate the COVID-19 risks for Aboriginal communities. We have opened up 2 grant programs for community organisations and groups. Under the COVID grants program, Aboriginal community organisations and groups are eligible to apply for up to $10,000 to meet immediate health and wellbeing needs of Aboriginal people. We funded 93 COVID-19 Aboriginal community response grants to date at a total of $823,415.
So can I just clarify that these are the community emergency response plans?
The community emergency response plans, or the community action plans, are part of the emergency management framework that happens at that local level. So you've got, say...
but sorry, this $18 million that you're talking about, would it include this? Is that right?
It could include, so part of it could include a range of things, and it's about being tailored. Are you talking about community... Sorry, I might ask you to restate the question.
Yeah, sorry. I'm wanting to understand. There's two issues here.
Yep.
I'm wanting to understand the role of Aboriginal Affairs in assisting to develop the community emergency response plans for COVID.
Yep.
And my particular issue is that some Aboriginal medical services have raised the issue that Aboriginal Affairs did not support their funding applications to increase staff or facilities to do the work.
Right. We have, so on the Aboriginal Affairs and the community plans, very active in all of the development of those particular plans that happen.
Did they, or so what was their role in terms of supporting or not supporting funding applications?
Well, if it's under our grant program, we assess the application, so we open it out, we talk to all of the organisations about which grants they might be suitable for under the two different pathways, because we also have the partnership support program of grants between $50,000 and $250,000.
Sure, thank you. I mean, I appreciate the information, but I'm really asking a very specific question, which, you know, look, the frustration around all of this, and through the Public Accountability Committee, we did actually do a whole hearing in relation to the response within Aboriginal communities, is the two concerns. One is that essentially communities that are dominated, that are, you know, predominantly Aboriginal people seem somehow to be considered as being a responsibility of the Commonwealth.
Oh, so if I can answer that question, Ms. Sharp, I'm sorry. $6,024,275 has been provided to the Aboriginal community-controlled health organisations, including AMSs, via the Centre for Aboriginal Health. So we provide the funding to the Centre for Aboriginal Health that then goes onto the Aboriginal medical services and wraparound supports. And $299,000 has been provided to the Aboriginal Health and Medical Research Council, the AH and MRC. And that supports their messaging campaigns.
Thank you. We'll come back on notice about some of that. Do you want to?
Oh, okay, good.
Happy to.
Minister, you'd be aware of the cultural institution down in Tasmania called Mona?
Yep.
With David Walsh. Now, he issued an edict that all staff there must be double vaccinated. All staff, and if they refuse to, that they would be terminated. What is the New South Wales government's policy on our major cultural institutions, the staff and vaccinations in those institutions?
Okay, do you want to?
Of course. So, and I'm sure I will.
Generally, I always get staffing issues to be answered by.
No, I wasn't.
And we've been, and I'll hand part of this to the Secretary because he is ultimately for the cluster responsible. So we have been working. Of course, we want people and encourage all of our staff to be vaccinated, and I'm proudly double vaccinated myself. We work on a risk. We have been working on a risk. So under the health orders with cultural institutions, there are requirements around vaccination for staff and visitors. So while those health orders are in place, the second is to understand the risks within all of our organisations in the public service, and that risk from a work health, particularly on a work health basis with our clients and citizens and customers, the risk that we might pose to those people. Each of our cultural institutions, and I'm sure Dr. Brand and Ms. Havilah, who are here, would be able to talk about the process they've undertaken, but we do a risk risk assessment to determine whether or not staff should be vaccinated, compel them as part of their employment to be vaccinated.
So do you have an indication of the vaccination rate amongst staff at the major cultural institutions?
I can tell you it's very high, and I'm happy to come back with my understanding, and we talk about this on a regular basis. As you know, the cultural chiefs and I meet very regularly. As I understand it, that a very large majority of their organisations, their staff are vaccinated, and they are working to encourage, obviously, everyone to be vaccinated, but I'm sure the Secretary...
Oh, no, you've covered it. Thank you.
Does Ms Havilah have anything to answer or to add to that?
I'm sure Ms Havilah and Mr Brand would both be able to answer.
Yeah, I'd like to hear from Ms Havilah.
Respective institutions.
I'd like to hear from Ms Havilah.
Ms Havilah, could you speak up, please, because hands started having issues.
Yes, I will. Lisa Havilah, just for Hansard. I'm in full support of what Ms Foy said in relation to the process that we've been undertaking. All of the CIs meet regularly to discuss this. In relation to double vaccinations moving forward post the 1st of December in relation to the changing health order, we're undertaking WHS assessment. Our WHS committee is currently undertaking that, and I'll wait for that report and take their advice.
Just one last question. Ms Havilah, do you have an indication of the double vaccination rate of your workforce, and is there a small pocket that's resisting?
We undertook a survey with our staff just over a month ago now, and that came back incredibly high, and I'm not aware of any resistance whatsoever around vaccinations.
What does incredibly high mean?
It means it's incredibly high.
105%.
Sorry, I couldn't hear.
At that time, which was over a month ago, it was over 95%.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms Havilah. Thank you.
We actually have another maybe 10 minutes to go because we're going to take some of the government's question time. So,
we split that 5-5.
5 and 5.
Big meaning. Questions. Thanks, Chair, and thanks to Minister. Returning to the document outcome 7, it's a statistic we're too familiar with that. Of Aboriginal youth aged 15 to 24, there's 38% not in employment, education or training in New South Wales, which is a terrible thing. But we read today that Deputy Premier Toole is reaching finalisation of an agreement with the federal government to bring in 55,000 Pacific Island workers to do the harvest in New South Wales. The obvious point, why aren't we providing training jobs and opportunities for Indigenous youth, the 38%, potentially a lost generation, instead of bringing in Pacific Islander workers to do these basic workforce tasks in New South Wales?
I think those observations have been made about the Pacific Island Workers scheme for some time. I am supportive of doing what we can to help the Pacific Islands, and I think that's important to do that anyway. But I certainly think that improving the skill base amongst Aboriginal people is a critical part of the Closing the Gap targets, and there are excuse me, I'm just having a bit of a trouble with hay fever. I think the target that relates to training is incredibly important, and I think that I'm sorry, I'm just having some difficulty at the moment. I'm going to ask the Secretary if he wouldn't mind responding. Excuse me for just...
Do you need a drink?
It's a good point. I think the federal government's acting because in the absence of Pacific Island workers, fruit will rot on the trees and other agricultural produce will go uncollected. So it's a necessary response for the moment, but yeah, you're right. So we should do everything we can to equip young people, particularly Aboriginal young people who otherwise aren't working, to take up some of those jobs.
Well, it's not high-skill work that requires some training, picking some fruit off the tree.
No, but
why isn't it happening? Because it's such an obvious thing, given the problems of 38% not in employment, education or training. Why shouldn't there be intergovernmental agreement that they come in to provide this workforce instead of bringing people from overseas?
Good question. I don't know the answer.
Can we get an answer and maybe get it right for the harvest next year?
Yeah.
And can I ask, is something similar happening in hospitality? Because the new Premier has outlined that we have dramatic labour force shortages. Businesses are screaming for hospitality workers as well as the agricultural sector. Isn't this another area where obviously we can do something for the 38% Indigenous, and in the economic recovery that should be our first priority? Because again, those hospitality workers look like they're going to come from overseas.
I agree with you, and in fact that there was a function, I think that you'll recall. I'm trying to recall I don't know who that was. I don't think it was me. There was a function in Parliament House, I think last year, which highlighted the work of some of the good work that's being done in the hospitality area to increase the number of Aboriginal people working in hospitality. But I'd be very happy to get some of those details and provide you to them on notice.
A lot more than a dozen in Parliament House, don't we? It's a big number, in the 38%.
It's a training. It's much more than just a dozen people in Parliament House.
I'm glad
and that's why I offered to get you the details and provide them on notice.
Thanks, Minister. Can I ask, Minister, in the school space, what involvement you have in the selection of connected community schools?
Well, as I've said before, the role of the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs and AA New South Wales is to be a central agency that coordinates policy. It's not a service delivery agency. Those decisions are taken by the Education Cluster and the Education Minister.
So you don't have any input then as to that policy? I can understand if a school's majority Indigenous, I can understand the theory of connected communities, and I hope in practice they go a lot better than Walgett High. But they're about to convert, what's in the process, Narooma High, 12% Indigenous, to become an Indigenous high school. Do you think we run the risk of pushback and resentment being generated by the other 88% who think...
I'm not familiar with the circumstances of Narooma High. I'd be very happy to take the question on notice, but I think it would probably be better directed to the Education Minister.
Yeah, I'll be there on Tuesday. I'll have a crack then. Thanks, Minister, for all your answers.
Minister, are you aware of a community-based campaign in Sydney South and Logarno for the protect historic house called Glen Lee?
I most certainly am, and I'm sure I've got something to say about that.
Mindful I only have 5 minutes.
I've actually been to Glen Lee. In fact, the previous owners of Glen Lee, the Matai family, were very close friends of our family and attended the same church in Logarno. And in fact, I remember while my mother was attending Bible study with Mrs. Matai in her house at Glen Lee, playing in the garden with the Matai children. I know it intimately, and when it's been raised with me, I responded by the local member who is assiduously supporting his local campaign. That's Mark Coure.
Okay, but have you taken any practical steps?
Absolutely. I, as I recall, wrote to Georges River Council on this, reminding of them of their capacity to issue an IHO to protect Glen Lee.
Okay, what's your response?
I don't actually
have a response to community calls for the state to purchase the site?
To purchase the site? Yep. Well, I will take that on notice. I wish I had the note in front of me. Unfortunately, I'm only able to have 3 advisors in the room, and my heritage advisor isn't one of them. She will be most upset that I can't remember.
If you can take that on notice, that's fine.
Hang on, there might be something happening here.
let's see. Date received.
The clock is ticking, Minister.
Yeah, look, I think, well, I don't want to take all your time. I'm not going to be a bastard. Look, let me just answer it on notice, because I can assure you, after what I've said, Glen Lee is a matter that I'm very, very interested in making sure something's done about.
Walt's the bastard here, Minister, not you.
I'm on my best behaviour today. Minister, one last question. Minister, would you be aware of current debate that's occurring in the United Kingdom involving sort of national trusts, heritage houses, historic homes, a national debate that's occurring where, in fact, there's been a report into 93 of the British National Trust properties, and there is a community debate about installing panels and reinterpreting historic homes that were built on the back of slavery, colonialism. Is there any work being done in New South Wales involving the historic houses and properties that are under your purview?
Slaves.
Convict houses.
My goodness.
I just want to hear the answer.
So are you referring to properties that are managed by Sydney Living Museums
that come
and the
under your
Old
ministerial
Historic Houses
purview?
Trust, or are you referring to heritage-listed properties that are in either public or private ownership? Or I just was wondering.
Well, whichever you prefer to answer. I would like to get a sense of if you put your toe into this pond, or if you moved.
I think one of the problems with, I will say this: the Heritage Council's very interested in this issue. And one of the things that we're proposing to do in the Heritage Act review is make it easier to amend statements of significance, because a large number of our state heritage listed properties were listed at a time where the significance of the actual site didn't properly take into account Aboriginal cultural heritage matters or the Aboriginal heritage of the particular location, or, for example, some of the concerns that you directly pointed to weren't taken account of either. So I actually think it's a very good thing that one of the things we'll be able to do when we bring to the Parliament an amended Heritage Act is deal with some of that. Now, in terms of the Sydney Living Museums, if you haven't visited Hyde Park Barracks,
I have.
Then you would know that whereas once upon a time it would have concentrated very heavily on the male convicts who were there, now it is a far more appropriate reflection of the whole of our history and the role of that site in our history, which includes, for example, the relevance of the barracks to European colonisation and the displacement of our Aboriginal people, and also brings in aspects of women's history, which if they weren't centrally if Hyde Park Barracks wasn't central to their experience, nevertheless, it's more faithfully represented as part of the narrative of the Hyde Park Barracks than it previously was.
Thank you.
All right. Any government questions?
Thank you very much, Chair. Minister, I just have one question. I was wondering if you had anything further you'd like to add to any of your statements or answers to that.
Here's your opportunity to clean up, Minister.
You're a pro, Ben. Is that really a question? You're a pro. Is that really a question?
No, absolutely. Are you rushing over
or an invitation?
Or are you just going to the bathroom?
Okay, there'll be no further questions.
We can tell you more about Glen Lee, or
no, that's enough.
or
That's
we can
enough.
tell you on
We've
notice.
had enough of that.
That's all right. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming, Minister. The committee will be, the Secretariat Committee will be in contact
I can, if you wouldn't mind, I would just add, in relation to Glenn Lee, I wrote to the chairman of the Heritage Council on the 18th of October in the following terms, and this is important, and I should have remembered this. I'm writing to request that the Heritage Council of New South Wales consider progressing a state heritage register listing for Glen Lee on the Georges River in Lugano. I go on to mention the IHO that Georges River Council put in place as a result of the advocacy of members of the community, which I added my weight to. Then I go on to talk about some of the significance of it, and I conclude by saying I'd appreciate consideration of progressing this listing as a priority